Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to the latest episode of the Hard Compound Live. For those of you who don't know, my name's Rich and I run and operate the Hard Compound. We're a one-stop shop for all things motorsport on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Just search for the Hard Compound. Come and give us a follow on any of those platforms, whichever one you use. We put out 2 or 3 posts every day in the morning, at lunchtime, and in the evening. These are written articles. And we cover all forms of motorsport, from F1 to IndyCar, from the feeder series to NASCAR to bikes to rallying to touring cars, and anything else that we can shake a stick at, really. Do come and give us a follow. We'd love to have you on board, so you don't miss all the good motorsport stuff. This is in the form of race reviews, race previews, any breaking news, throwbacks, birthdays, favorite circuits, and just all kinds of good motorsport stuff. So do come along for a ride. And you have noticed that we also do live video interviews such as this one. These are broadcast on our Facebook, YouTube, and our Twitter only. They're also saved on all 3 platforms, in the video section on Facebook and in the live section on our YouTube. And we are in the process of putting all these on a podcast provider in audio form, so you can listen, so you can download them and listen to them at your leisure. We've had over 100 guests on, from Mr. Mario Andretti to Jackie Ickx to Chip Ganassi to Hans Stuck to we've had like Derek Warwick, Ari Luyendyk, Stefan Johansson, most of the British touring car grid. Many terrific guests have come to join us, and as I said, they're all saved in the video section on Facebook and in the live section on our YouTube. So do go and check them out, but don't do it just yet, because this evening we have a chat that's going to be a little bit different. We aren't just going to be discussing motorsport on 4 wheels. We're also going to be discussing motorsport on water, the journalistic side of motorsport, even like record-breaking attempts, and just a huge array of motorsport stuff, including acting. So without any further ado, we're going to bring in our live guest this evening. He has worked for Autosport. He's worked in F1 with the Toleman team with Ayrton Senna and Derek Warwick. He's also started up his own Formula 2 team. He's run powerboat teams, and much more. Some great stuff coming up. So we're going to bring him in right now. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Mr. Chris Witty. And there is the man himself. Chris, how are you?
I'm well, sir. I'm well. Good to be with you. And hello to everyone out there.
Yes, wonderful. Yeah, thank you very much for coming on and having a chat. Before we go any further, we've got to say thank you to Mr. Kenny Atchison, who put us in touch at Silverstone recently. Obviously, he's come on for a chat in the past. So thank you, Kenny. But also, yeah, Chris, thank you very much for coming on this evening. You're the kind of person I never thought I'd have on. I thought he's not going to be interested in coming on for a chat. But you were, so thank you very much for coming on. Much appreciated.
No, it's a pleasure.
As I said, we've got a lot to get through. There's some incredible stories coming up, and from the world of motorsport and TV and stage and all kinds of stuff, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So I'll turn my attention to the comment section. Hello, guys, the guys who are tuning in already. If you have any comments or questions for Chris, or any memories, then do put them in the comment section. We'll work them into the chat so we can all have a chat like one big happy family, which is what we like. Firstly, Chris, how's everything going with you? Obviously, you're still keeping yourself busy, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, really, because you sort of think about retirement, and then you look around and you find you've got an awful lot of mates who are of similar ages, and we sort of have these reunion lunches, which we've been having quite recently, and we just sit there and talk like a load of old farts, and then find that we've actually got a lot to still to offer the sport, really. And I'm actually helping my son at the moment, so I thought I'd get that in quickly, early. He's created, at university, he basically became involved with, or interested in sustainability, and was watching Drive to Survive on Netflix. I mean, he said to me at the time, "Have you ever watched Drive to Survive?" And I said, no, I haven't. I haven't really had an interest in it because back in the day when I was in F1, when Bernie Ecclestone was in control, um, he never really wanted the cameras to go behind the scenes. All right. I mean, he once used the analogy to me. We were talking about something over passes. I needed more passes, and he said, "Why do these sponsors always want bloody passes?" He said, "You know, if you went to Wimbledon and you wouldn't want to go into the changing room and watch Bjorg and McEnroe changing before the final." And I thought about it, and back then my answer was no. But the world's changed, and now everyone wants to see Verstappen and Alonso and Hamilton, all those guys sort of behind the scenes. So it's just the way the world has evolved. So my son, who's 25, he's very much part of the current era of motorsport. He sees motorsport through the eyes of the youth of today, and it's quite interesting from my point of view because I'm that's been behind me. I was last in F1 sort of in the early 80s. We're talking about 40 years ago when I was actively involved, and it's changed. The sport's changed. So I've sort of moved with those changes, and I'm now watching my son work in it. And what he's trying to do at the moment is take waste race tires, okay, and turn them into sustainable footwear, using the rubber mix to make the soles, and eventually to use all the wasted team apparel and do the uppers and everything like that, so they will be fully sustainable. And I have to say, he's getting a lot of interest from teams and people and whatever. And next year, I see it growing as more and more people find out about it. So that's something that I'm going to support him on very much.
Yeah,
so.
fantastic. That's a terrific initiative. It's a terrific idea. Obviously, with green and sustainability being at the forefront of everything these days, it's certainly and given that motorsport isn't perceived as the greenest, the most sustainable, it's a fantastic way to sort of link the two, and hopefully to great success.
Yeah, no. So that's compoundfootwear.com. Anyway, that's enough. That's my plug for my son. Let's talk about other things.
And we're going to put a link down here later, folks. Don't worry.
Brilliant.
You can go and check it out. No, but obviously, something we do have to address first off the bat. We mentioned it off air, and I put a post out on Hard Compound earlier. It's 48 years today, isn't it, since we lost Graham Hill and the, I guess, oft forgotten Mr. Tony Breeze as well. Obviously, you were around motorsport at the time, weren't you? So I guess you can remember it very well.
I do. I mean, I knew Graham not that well, okay, but I knew Tony very well because obviously, as he came up through Formula 4, but Formula 3 really, and Formula Atlantic, I knew him quite well. In fact, I still have a letter from him in my archives, writing about something, thanking me for something, which I've kept all these years, and I think about it, and I think about his talent, and he had a bit of an aura. He was self-assured without being arrogant, okay, but he knew his abilities. Funnily enough, as did Ayrton, who we'll talk about a bit later. And I always think that it was tragic, and I remember that night. I was at with Ian Phillips because I lived with Ian and his brother. We lived in a house off Kensal Rise, and it was in effect the unofficial Autosport editorial office. I mean, in those days when I worked with Ian, the magazine was our life. I mean, we never shut off and turned the door and walked out. It was 24/7. We were living and breathing motorsport, and I think that was very much reflected in the magazines in those days, because there was no other medium. I mean, there was no WhatsApp, there was no Twitter, nothing. I mean, what we wrote was, and also Motoring News, what we wrote was the Bible, effectively. Yeah. But I remember that Saturday night, and it was a bombshell for sure, because we were sitting in Saturday. There was no racing going on. It was the end of the season. It was late November, as it is now, and it was a shock. But it was something that we were sort of used to it back in those days. I mean, I've lived through an era of a lot of death and the race drivers dying, not just in racing cars, but also, I mean, there was obviously this being a plane crash. There was Carlos Pache, who I knew. He died in a plane crash as well. So life was different then, and we learned to live with it. And I wouldn't say we were immune to it, okay, but it was something that we were brought up with.
Yeah, it was just part of what went on at the time. And I mean, and yeah, you mentioned him and like Carlos, and at the same time, you know, there was also like Tom Price and people like that who also lost around that kind of time. It was like that lost. It was part of that lost generation. Obviously, there's some people aren't quite as well known as others, but we had David Tremaine on here, and obviously he wrote that wonderful book, and he mentions Tony in there. And yeah, I can imagine it must have been very difficult, even if it was part of.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I know David. I saw him a few weeks ago. We were doing a film shoot together, and I mean, certainly, I mean, Ian Phillips was very, very close to Roger Williamson.
Right, yeah.
We both knew Tom Price, okay, and obviously with Tony, I mean, it was awful, really, if you think about it. It was a year we lost all three of them in a year, or certainly in a relatively play. And they were all incredibly talented in their own individual way, and there were different characters. But what I liked about motor racing then, certainly when I started writing for Motoring News and then for Autosport in the late 60s, early 70s, was that we got to know drivers, particularly as they were coming up through Formula Ford, Formula 3, and they became friends or acquaintances, and some you became closer to, just as your personality and characters, you know, evolved with theirs and whatever. And we were very much a family, and so, you know, drivers were going away doing Formula 1, Formula 2, Formula 3. It was a very, very close-knit group of people that went racing back then, and I think it's very different. Well, I'm sure it is very different today, because sport in general is very different. I mean, I remember when I was 15 or 16, I was mad on football, and I was up in Liverpool, funnily enough, touring with a play, which we can come on to later.
Of course.
And I went to Liverpool's training ground. Okay. And I turned up, and I was the only one there, and I was watching these guys, Roger Hunt and Ian St. John and Ian Callahan, and Bill Shankly was the manager. And I was watching, and a guy came up to me, and he said, he spoke to me, he said something, and because I'd been there for hours, you know, just watching these guys play and doing their workouts and everything like that. No security, nothing like that. And I was asked whether I wanted to go and have a cup of tea to warm up. And I was 15, 16, I think it was. And I went in, and Shankly said to me, he said, "You're not from around here, lad, are you?" And I went, "No." And he said, "What team do you support?" And I said, "Chelsea." And luckily, Chelsea's manager at the time was Tommy Docherty, who was another Scot. And he went, Tommy's team. Oh, you're all right here, lad. And it was fantastic. And to be able to do that now to the current generation, forget it. You know, you can't get anywhere near these people. You know,
you get nowhere near it, would you? I mean, you wouldn't be any within 100 yards of the main entrance, would you?
But you know, but even motor racing back then, when I was little, when I went to Crystal Palace and these, you could go into the paddock, and Jim Clark and Graham Hill would sign your autograph books, and you'd stand there and everything, and there was no jostling, no people saying stand back, you're not allowed near it. It was just totally different, which is why I fell in love with it.
Yeah, which is fantastic, and that's something that's very much lost. And I mean, even when I was young, I mean, obviously I grew up in the 80s, and you know, it was fairly similar, not to the extent of that, but it's fairly similar in the 80s, where you could, on a qualifying day at the F1, you could go around the grid, around the pits. But it just kind of brings you closer to it, and it gets you hooked. Just want to say hello, actually, in the comments. You've got Mike Wilds in. Evening, Mike. Former guest on here, and
he's not far down. He'll be down in Mere. He'll be about 20 minutes away from me. So
okay.
he and I are due to have lunch again. So he'll probably get in touch with me after this, and we can go and have a nice lunch at one of his locals.
Super. Well, we need to get a whole bunch of you guys who have come on here together for a lunch. We need to do that
and record it and get us all onto a compound one evening. Yeah, that'd be a good idea. Yeah,
good, wouldn't it? We'll work on that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, good.
Right. So, sorry, Mike, you've been roped in. But I mean, talking about getting hooked on motorsport, I mean, where did it all begin for you? I mean, you've obviously told me this off camera, but it's a very cool starting place for you in the world of motorsport and the first event you attended.
Well, it is. I think many of us have our fathers to blame or to thank. Okay, really, for it, because I was brought up in Berlin. I was born in the UK, but I was brought up in Berlin because my father worked for British European Airways, which was the European version of what is now BA. All right. And he was stationed at Tempelhof Airport, which, funnily enough, is where they have the Formula E race at the moment. And so I was brought up there, and Arvis was being used as it was, and I remember, or he told me later that he said, "Oh, I took you to Arvis." I said, "How old was I?" He said, "Oh, you were about 3." And I said, "What did I see?" You know, whatever. And he said, "Well, there was an F2 race and there was an F3 race." And I said, "Well, who won?" He said, "Oh, I can't remember who won the F2 race, but he said John Cooper won the F3 race." And I did some research certainly in the last sort of 15 years. I mean, my father's been gone 20, 30 years now, whatever. And I saw that John Cooper actually did win the F3 race in the Cooper Streamliner. So it was the 500cc with either a Jap or a Norton in the back. I can't remember what. Someone will correct me. And it was quite interesting because he got knocked off at the first corner, but then restarted. But because this thing was so quick with the streamline body, he won by miles. All right. So I'm sure
because of the circuit as well. It's just too long.
Well, it was the banking, and I was sitting on the outside, because watching them coming around the banking. Okay, and they'd blast down the autobahn, round a hairpin at the end, and blast back up the autobahn.
Yeah.
It was a lot of natural ability was required, obviously, for these guys. And I think the F2 race was won by, oh God, what was his name? It was in a Curie Francorchamps Ferrari, an F500. The name will come to me, but I can't really remember much about it. But what was ironic about this was that last year, my wife and I decided to go. She said, let's go for a long weekend somewhere. And I said, let's go to Berlin. And we went to Berlin, and I said, I'm determined to go and see where we live, to see if it still exists. And I know it was within walking distance of the Arvis track. And I found the place, found where we lived, and we walked to the Arvis track, and very little remains. I mean, the actual bank area is flattened, and in that middle bit is a truck stop. And then the big tower, which you can see on the outside, which used to have Mercedes on and whatever, that still exists. And that's that's a seedy motel. I mean, we went in and had a cup of tea. And there were lots of pictures on the wall, which I had a look at and everything like that. And then they've redone the grandstand, or the tribune on the right. They've made that all neat and tidy. But as a track, it's just motorways and whatever. But it was fun to sort of just stand there and think, blimey, I was here in 1953, and here I am in 2023, last year or whatever it was, and just the first track I ever went to, But
wow.
So I think the seeds were sown really then in my psyche or whatever, that motor racing was something that I was going to watch, And my father made sure after that.
Yeah, made absolutely sure. I mean, I just on Avis, I believe the southern hairpin is in the woods now, and you can still see a bit of the raised bit, and apparently it's still there. And there's reminders. Apparently, I've not been, but apparently.
No, I mean, I wasn't going to walk all that way down there, and not at my age, and we didn't have a rental car, and I just believed it was down there somewhere, but certainly the area of the banking. But then after that, when we came back to the UK, my father started taking me to Goodwood and to Crystal Palace and Brands Hatch, all the southern circuits. All right, I never went north, never went to Silverstone, or until decades later. I mean, it was what was convenient for my dad to go down south.
Yeah. We're both from the south of England. I mean, I think I've only been to Donington and Knockhill. I'm about to make a weekend of both of them. We've got plenty down south, haven't we?
I mean, I did all the circuits afterwards, but when I was lying up sitting in the car with my father, roaring off down, we used to go off to, Goodwood or Brands Hatch, and it was a question of right, the kids get put in the grandstand with a hamper, okay, and a program, and the racing went on, and the dads used to just go and drink. And then when the racing finished, we were collected, and there was the Grand Prix home. And how I survived to this day, I don't know. I mean, because in those days there wasn't drinking and driving didn't exist. You just drank and drove, whatever.
Yeah.
But they were my early experiences, and I remember, seeing Graham Hill must have been the late 50s. He actually drove a modified Bath with a little engine. He drove it from Bath to Brands Hatch and did some demo laps in it. And I remember that. I remember being told that Archie Scott Brown had a little withered hand. And I mean, he was an incredible driver for a guy who could actually drive really with one arm. Okay. But I remember having a nightmare about that. This man creeping into my bedroom. I was about 7 or 8, because obviously I think he raced, before he was killed or whatever. But all those guys, and Les Leston and Graham Warner and Lotus Elites and, Austin A40s and the 3.8 Jaguars, Roy Salvadori, Graham Hill, all those things, that they were just fantastic. And I was at Goodwood when Moss had his shunt as well, but I was on the other side of the track,
Wow.
Great days. Great days.
I mean, that's an era to get involved with, isn't it? I mean, that's some of the names you just put in there is just absolutely fantastic, and I can see how you would get hooked. At that time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because you got to remember, in those days, you'd go to a race meeting, whether it was at Crystal Palace, Goodwood, or Brands Hatch, and the rock stars, be it Hill, Clark, Surtees, or whatever, Brabham, they'd do at least 4 races that day. They'd do the GT race, they'd do the touring car race, they'd do the main F1 race, and they'd probably do another race or whatever. So, watching Clark in a Lotus Cortina was joyous, I mean, cocking the wheel and racing in amongst the galaxies, and watching guys like Jack Sears, who I met later on in life. And you meet these guys, you grow up, okay, and you become a journalist, and then you meet them in the paddock, and you just think, it's like John Fitzpatrick, who I know, who then was British touring car champion or whatever. And I just think to myself, guys like Chris Craft, who knew well, and I just say to them, I used to say, God, you were my heroes when I was a little lad, and now you're just a mate, type thing, and whatever. It was great days.
That's lovely. That's lovely. And just mentioned Clark in the Lotus Cortina. There's that lovely bit of footage. I think it's out the back at Hawthorne or somewhere like that at Brands Hatch, and it's just the most beautiful controlled drift of Jim Clark in the Cortina. I just think if I had a time machine, that's where I'd be heading first.
Yep.
Just very quickly, want to park the motorsport very quickly, because your first, I guess, I don't know if your first love or your first foray into something that you might do when you're a bit older. You were on stage and screen as an actor, child actor, most famously in The Railway Children, which I told my mother-in-law, and she was incredibly excited. She was like, "Oh, really? That's amazing!" I think she was more impressed by that than the motorsport. Because like, she loves the film, she absolutely loves it, and says, "Oh, I think I'll watch that this weekend." So there you go. You're gonna get another 25p in the pocket.
Well, that's what everyone thinks. Everyone thinks that every time it's shown, we get a load of money, and I'm rolling in it. I wish it was the case, but back then we didn't have all these channels like Talking Pictures and various other channels which constantly show old movies, because our contracts were buyouts. We just basically signed a contract for so many weeks' work, and we were paid. The only way you could make money, I suppose, if you were a well enough known actor and you took a percentage of the take. People like Tom Cruise do that these days and whatever, and you it's a bit of a gamble. You just think, right, this film's going to make a load of money. I'll take 5% of what it makes. Okay. But I mean, for me, funny enough, the Railway Children, which is actually the last film I ever did, and I was a motoring journalist at that time as well. So I had two professions effectively. I was a journalist by day and an actor by night, or I got time off to act. I mean, my priority was acting, and when I came back from Germany, very briefly, my mother sent me to drama school, all right, at 6 years of age, all right. Because one of her friends said, send him, he can do modeling, he's he's a good looking young baby, a boy or whatever. And it's sort of, I hit it off really. I sort of started working straight away, and I got a film part when I was like 6 or something. And the first film I did was back in 1956, and it really snowballed from there. So all that sort of those 10 years from sort of 6 until I was 16, I was just constantly working. I was very lucky that I was a successful child actor without being a star as such. I was always working, but my passion was always cars. I just loved racing cars, and later on, my mother said, I said, oh, I want to go into racing. I want to give up acting or whatever. And she said, no. She said, do what Steve McQueen does. Be a well-known actor and race part-time. I always remember thinking as a 17-year-old, yeah, really, okay. But I got involved with motorsport sort of when a friend of mine, Justin Haler, who's long since passed away, Justin came up with this idea of a magazine called Competition Car. All right. And I was still acting. And to be honest, I was busy working as an actor. And motor racing was the idea of working on this magazine was a bit of a hobby. All right. From that point of view. And Justin had no money. All right. But he had a lot of, he had great desire and ambition, whatever. And we used to get press passes to Brands Hatch. There was a press officer there, lovely man called Graham Macbeth, who's long since departed, but he was a lovely man. He used to have a white sort of umpires type cap, whatever, looked like a sort of a Dickie Bird type character or whatever. And he would say, well, why should I give you these passes? And we took a mock-up down of the magazine, how we thought it was going to be laid out and everything like that. And he said, right, okay. He said, all right, I think, you're doing a good job. So we were then allowed to have access to all the John Webb circuits, because John Webb owned all the circuits then, all right? So that's how sort of the motor racing, sort of the journalistic side started to sort of evolve, started to build up. Meanwhile, I was still acting. I was still doing plays, West End plays, work. I played Rex Harrison's son in a West End production for about 6 months. And I would leave Motoring News on every night, okay? And whatever test car I had, whether it was a Ford Mustang or whatever, I'd drive down to near Shaftesbury Avenue, park the car in an NCP car park, go in, put all my makeup on, go and do my 2-hour performance or whatever, leave, take all my makeup off, drive home, okay, sleep. Next morning, go into Motoring News, work the day at Motoring News, then go to the theatre in the evening. I mean, it was great. I mean, I really enjoyed it. It was life in the fast lane in many respects. But then Motoring News was great. I mean, my two sort of helpers or guiding lights there were Andrew Marriott and Mike Dudson, and they're both dudes about 84 now, 83, 84. Andy's just turned 80, but Andy's just full of energy. I see him speak to him on a fairly regular basis. And they were the ones that really encouraged me, because I was incredibly enthusiastic. And what basically happened was that Justin and I, who were, as I said, partners in crime, we realized that we were never going to get Competition Car off the ground at that point. And we were both simultaneously offered jobs by Autosport and Motoring News. And I got the Autosport gig, funnily enough, and Justin was offered Motoring News. And it was like, right, where's Autosport? Chris, can you go to Castle Combe this weekend? And Justin, can you go to Mallory Park? So I said, well, I've got a car. I was able to buy myself a car at 17, a new car from money I'd earned as an actor. So I drove down to Castle Combe in 1968, Whit Monday event, and did my first ever report for Autosport. Had my name in it, tiny, hardly any words, just results and everything. And Justin went on the train up to Mallory. He went to Leicester. Then he got a bus to Kirkby Mallory or wherever the track was, whatever. And he did that report. And he came back and he went, And we were offered more work, okay? And he went, can we swap? And I said, why? And he said, well, in Autosport, you get your name in it. And in Motoring News, they just put your initials. And I want my name in it. So I went, Okay, fine. And he was much more ambitious. You know, he wanted to be a writer, wanted to be a journalist, whereas I was still acting. It was just, I just enjoyed doing it. You know, I hadn't really thought at that stage that I was going to be a professional journalist or whatever.
Like a little hobby, side hobby.
Well, yeah, exactly. So we swapped. So Andy Marriott said, you know, we could really use your enthusiasm. So I joined Motoring News and worked for Motoring News for a few years. Okay. And then Justin went to Autosport, and you know, I have to say, I mean, he was a brilliant journalist. I mean, very good investigative journalist and everything. And but knew where he wanted to go. He was very ambitious, and he eventually got competition car off the ground. I mean, I'm not skipping too much, because he then said to me at the end of 1970, and I was still at Motoring News doing F3, and he was doing F3 reports for Autosport. He said, "Why don't we set up our own Formula 2 team? No, why don't we go racing with our own team?" That was it. And I said, "Oh, okay, fine, all right, okay, well, all right. Well, what F3 team?" And he said, "No." He said, "I've done F3." He said, "Let's go F2." So I went. And I remember we're 20 years of age at this stage, all right. And he said, let's go up to Lotus and we'll get them to help us, and we can run the sort of the semi-works Lotus F2 team."
As you do when you're 20 and starting out in motorsport, as you do.
Yeah, no. So we hopped into my Hillman Imp. I had a Hillman Imp. Now, I preferred a Hillman Imp to a Mini, because I liked oversteer, and blimey, in a Hillman Imp, you've got chronic oversteer, massive understeer, and then huge oversteer. Anyway, we went up to Lotus, up to Hethel, and we went and had a meeting with Peter Waugh, okay? And we sort of presented our case and said, we've got a young driver here who was putting up virtually 2/3 of the budget, a guy called Richard Scott, okay, who was very quick in F3, all right? We'd like to run Rainer Vissel in the other car, because Rainer was a factory driver at that stage. There was Emerson and Rainer. So Chapman came out, and he sort of joined, and he said, he said, "It'd be much easier if you ran Emerson and Rainer. Why do you have to run the F3 boy or whatever?" And we said, "Well, because of budget, you know, whatever." He said, "Okay, well, whatever you want." So we ended up actually given the title of the LIRA, which stood for London International Racing Associates, okay, wonderful name that we came up with, LIRA Team Lotus. And we had 2 Lotus 69s. I think one was loaned and one was bought through Lotus Components, because they had a division there that sold customer cars or whatever. And it was the same year that Ron Dennis and Neil Trundle set up Rondell. And we went to no team had any sponsors. Ron didn't have any sponsors, and we didn't have any main sponsors. We were trying to get Matchbox, but eventually lost out the following year. They went with Surtees, all right, okay. I was always disappointed, but then I realized in the end that the Surtees name and John Surtees as a person had a bit more kudos than sort of Chris.
Carried some weight, yeah.
Yeah, a bit more weight, all right. But so we went to the first race was Thruxton 71. Must have been 71. And Graham Hill won for Rondell, and we were a bit peeved, you know, bloody Rondell's got one over us. Anyway, we went to the next race at Pau, which was non-championship, but it was for invited drivers. So we were only allowed one car, because they only allowed 16 cars to start the race, so they didn't take a massive entry at that stage.
Because it was a street circuit, of course.
Yeah, it was a fantastic street. And we won, but admittedly by luck, because Beltoise was leading the race, and then he had a rotor arm failure with about 3 laps to go. Okay, but you know, that's the way it was. And we came through and we won. So after 2 races, we're thinking Rondell won, LIRA Team Lotus won. Okay. The problem was that we struggled with money, and I put quite a lot of my money in from an actor. Okay, as an actor, but I was paying. Silly me thinking about, I was paying for the running expenses, which meant engine rebuilds and all the stuff that basically that literally disappeared. Okay. Whereas the hardware sort of remained, I suppose, with Richard Scott. And it sort of all ended a bit acrimoniously. We went to the workshops one day towards the end of that year and found the workshop bare, and the cars and engines had gone. And Richard had come down with some mates and done a weekend removal of the truck and all the hardware, and because he wanted his money back, because he'd fallen out with the team. I think he'd fallen out. Well, he'd probably fallen out with both of us. It'd be wrong to blame Justin for everything. And because Justin's no longer with us, and he can't basically say, no, that's wrong, Chris.
Yeah, he can't defend himself.
So no, so it all ended, and Rondell carried on, Ron and Neil carried on, and they built themselves up into a team. And I ended up the end of that year. I ended up in a weird way. There was an F2 series out in Brazil and Argentina, the F2 Torneo as it was called, and I ended up being roped in to go out there as a second mechanic to Jean-Pierre Jarier. But my job was basically to talk up the wheels and make sure the car was clean, but not to do anything on the car that could actually break or pull him off the track or anything like that. So that was it. So then when I came back from that series, which was early part of 72, Justin sort of popped up again and he said, oh, I've got the backing to start competition car. And I went, oh, wow, well done. And he said, do you want to be part of it? And I was a bit sort of like, my fingers have been burnt the previous year because Justin hadn't put a penny into the F2 team. All right. Okay. So the financial loss really was me. And although Richard got some money back from selling all the equipment, I was a bit sort of like, don't really want to do this. So I said to Justin, I said, look, I'll work for the magazine. I'll work as editor at large or whatever. But I want a salary. And that's basically what I did. And around that time, I did The Railway Children, which is 70. We did that in 70. And I did a play for the BBC after that with George Cole, the great George Cole, who I did a few things with, played his son in a series and played another character in this thing. And then I quit. I decided that I really wanted to go full-time into motorsport because the old man, Wesley T, who basically owned Motorsport and Motoring News at the time, was into amateur dramatics. And he sort of liked the idea of having a child actor on board or a young actor on board. But he did say to me at one stage, he said, I think you'll make a better journalist than you would an actor. You've got to make a decision in life, what you want to do. And I thought about it and I thought, if I become a journalist, I've got the opportunity to travel the world. Whereas if I'm an actor, I'm just going to sit and wait for the phone to ring. And I'm going to have to leave home. And I started to worry about sort of dependencies and stuff like that. So I thought, I'm going to quit acting. And I went into journalism. And I have to say, I don't regret it because I traveled all over the world. Ever since I made that commitment, I've traveled far and wide and done so many different things in motorsport. I've loved it.
It's fantastic. And to travel the world doing something that you love and what you're passionate about as well, and you've got a genuine interest in is, it kind of can't be not by anyone, can it?
It ticked all the boxes. And apart from, again, we can get onto it later, but what I always wanted to do in motor racing was to experience all the disciplines. I loved single seaters. I wrote about F2, I wrote about F3, never wrote about F1 much. I think I only did F1 report ever for Autosport, and that, funnily enough, was when Tom Price won the Race of Champions. Okay, but Formula 2, Formula 3, but then things like the European Touring Car Championship when BMW were fighting Ford. So you had Mike Cranafus from Ford on one side and Jochen Neerpacht, and those Batmobiles, those cars were brilliant. And I loved going to those races and reporting about that kind of racing and GTs and sports cars. I just wanted to do everything because to me, motor racing covered the board, the whole spectrum. It wasn't just single seaters, and even down to going to the States and watching IndyCar, and I've been to 3 or 4 NASCAR Daytona 500s and things like that and whatever. I've never ever been to the Indy 500. Funnily enough, that is one that remains on my bucket list.
It's probably the only thing that I've got on you in life.
I've had plenty of invites, but I've just never really got around to it. I think what I'd like to do, though, my son is old enough and more interested. I think I might go next year and take my son, take Alex, because then then at least we can share the experience together. I went to Fontana, which was a 500 miler. So I've been to super speedways and I've been to road courses, been to Laguna, I've been to Baltimore, I've been to all those different places, but I've never done the Indy 500.
Well, I'd love to have some of those, but yeah, the Firebird, it's just the best. One of the greatest bets in racing, and it just is. You've got to experience it to believe it's wonderful.
It's funny actually, because before Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Grand Prix, 10 days ago, or whatever, a couple of weeks ago, Derek Daly, who I know well from obviously from Formula Ford and Formula 2, Formula 1 or whatever, and Derek, as you know, has lived in the States for God knows how many decades now. And he was talking about Las Vegas on a Twitter thing, Twitter feed or whatever, or X, whatever you call it. And I said to him, I said, what you got to remember here is that in America, they want, when sport is happening, they want a result. They want something that keeps them on the edge of their seats until almost the final whistle, so to speak. And I said, what Indy does, it's actually quite a false event, because anyone really can win Indy because of the yellows, the pit stops, the strategy, and whatever. And I said, I think the Americans will never fall out of love with Indy, but they could very easily fall out of love with Las Vegas, because the people that the Formula One, I think, is attracting to the races in Miami and not so much even COTA, but certainly Las Vegas, are not what I call true racers, true enthusiasts. You know, they're a new breed of people, or whatever.
Like sports and drama fans rather than the actual racing.
Yeah. You know. I mean, I personally, I enjoyed the Las Vegas race. You know, once, I mean, look. The thing is, when we raced in Las Vegas 40 years ago, and there are a group of us that I look at what Formula One's doing now, and I talk to some of my mates, like John Watson or whatever, and I go, John, we've been there, we've done that, we've got the T-shirt, we've got the video, we did that with Bernie 40 years ago. It didn't work then, so Bernie dropped it. You know, unless it made money. I mean, Bernie was, unlike Liberty, who are prepared to put hundreds of millions into an event, okay, all right, and subsidize it. Bernie wasn't going to do that with Las Vegas, you know, back in 80, 81, 82. It was going to be, this is what it costs. If you pay the fee, we'll come and play. We'll come and perform in your backyard or whatever. But I remember, you know, back in Vegas, we had a lot of stars there. I mean, when we went to Dallas, we had Bobby Ewing, although, you know, the Dallas people all turned up, okay? We're all milling around. Yeah. In Vegas, we had Diana Ross on the podium. We went and saw her in the evening or whatever. But they were, I have to say, they were celebrities that at least we could recognize and know who they were. I mean, I think Martin Brundle is a hero for going on the grid. And I mean, he does it on purpose. I mean, he, you know, it's like,
he plays to it.
Let's go and have a bit of fun here, you know, really, you know, and I don't take it seriously. I think it's great fun. And also those people are actually, I understand, are actually paid a lot of money to be on the grid, whether they like Formula One or not, you know.
Yes.
Which makes me laugh when they're interviewed and they don't want to talk. And you think, well, hang on, you've been asked to go, okay.
You must know someone's going to want to talk to you.
Because they know nothing about it.
Yes, it's all part of the fun. But I mean, just going back to what you're saying about the Indy 500 and the event of it. It's the same with like NASCAR. You know, it's all split into stages now. The race, and it's just to keep everyone on their toes, isn't it? And keep everyone interested with it.
I mean, luckily, I mean, I sort of went off NASCAR a bit when they started to sort of, you know, segment it. You know, like there was the chase, and then you did this, and to me, I'm more of a purist. I just like the race for the points, and the guy who wins is the guy that's got the most points. I think the problem. I mean, I remember sitting in the bleachers, as they call it, at Indy at Daytona with a mate, and we understood what was going on, and we bought all the gear and all the fantastic sort of NASCAR jackets, which I was afraid once we bought them and we got back to the UK. I never wanted to wear mine again. I was too embarrassed to go out into the street. But my son, okay, when he discovered these jackets still in their cellophane, it was like, and this was only a couple of years ago, it was Dad, that is so cool. I said, what? He said, that is so retro. And I said, it's yours, son. It's willingly. You can have all my stuff that I've never worn.
But it's the kind of stuff that fitted when you were there. But when you came home, you're like, oh no. I didn't know where to wear it, whatever. But the thing about NASCAR though is that in amongst, you know, you look around you and
they don't really know, or they're big Jeff Gordon fans as they were there, or Darrell Waltrip, or Dale Earnhardt as he was then.
Darrell Waltrip was one of my favourites when I was younger.
Yeah,
him and Ricky Rudd were my two.
Yeah, because the Americans engage with the drivers, with the personalities, all right, not necessarily with the cars or the teams, and they don't really understand strategy or whatever and stuff. But it was great fun, I have to say, great fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just been keeping an eye on the comment section. We've got a guy called Tim Price. Evening, Tim. He said before, Competition Car was the best magazine. Started in 1972. There you are, a fan.
I know Tim is a fan, and Tim sends me lovely notes about Competition Car. Funny enough, I'm dreadful. I never kept anything. All right, so for many years, all my magazines or whatever, they just disappeared. But then, thanks to eBay, I've managed to get most of the Competition Car magazines back. Certainly the ones that I worked for or whatever. And I sort of read them, and I bring them out, and I think to myself, they are in terms of their presentation, okay, they are extremely dated. All right. But I think the content, if you actually read the content for what it tells you, I think it was a magazine that, and I remember this distinctly, when Justin, when we were thinking of how to put a magazine together, he said, we need to do something that's between Motorsport, which was the monthly, all right, and Autosport being the weekly. And I said, well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to outscoop, which is the word we always use, I'd like to outscoop Autosport and Motoring News. And he said, how are we going to do that with a monthly? And I said, we'll find a way. And one of the things we used to do with the Grand Prix, and I think this was a very clever idea, and I still think it's a clever idea, was that we said, look, there's no point rewriting a Grand Prix report that everyone knows about from the French Grand Prix or the Austrian Grand Prix or whatever, and it'll be in Motorsport that month. So what we would do is we would select our driver of the day, okay? For example, with the French Grand Prix, the great race that Chris Amon had, where he basically had a puncture when he should have won it, and had a puncture, and he drove back up and came second or whatever. So
was that Rouen? Was it Rouen?
No, that was Clermont-Ferrand.
Sorry, yeah.
It was the race where Helmut Marko, bless him, got the stone through
the visor. Yeah.
So I'd phone Chris Amon, and I'd say, right, Chris, I want to come and see you, and I want you to tell me the weekend from your perspective. So the whole story would be, Chris Amon's weekend at the French Grand Prix, and it was all about how he went about that weekend. We did when Revson won the British Grand Prix. He called Revson. I said, Peter, right, let's the British Grand Prix from your point of view. So all the Grand Prix were done through the eyes of a driver. Okay,
it's a completely different take, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is. You fill in a little bit just to sort of finish off the race, but it's through their eyes. And I still think to this day, if someone sort of adopted, I mean, well, it's difficult these days because everything is instant news. I mean, it's instant, instant email, instant web stuff like that, podcast or whatever, stuff like that. So I mean, you've forgotten about it. We've already forgotten about what was the last Grand Prix, Abu Dhabi. That was 2 days ago, and it's gone, bang, whatever. But we tried with Competition Car to do things differently. I mean, Roger Clark at that time was our top rally driver, so I thought we need a rally column. So I called Roger and I said, would you do a column for me? And he said, well, you come and ghost it. I said, yeah, no problem. So I'd go up to Narborough near Leicester, and I'd sit down with Roger and the beautiful Judy, his lovely wife. She would bring the tea and the biscuits and everything, and I'd just sit with Roger with a tape recorder or whatever, and it was his month. Okay, so we had the Roger Clark column. None of the other magazines had anything like that. And I did the same with Jerry Birrell. I mean, Jerry, we felt that Jerry was an up-and-coming driver. So we did Jerry's column. And I know when Darren Banks, when they were doing the Jerry Birrell book recently, or over the last couple of years, he said to me, did I have any memories? And I said, it's very difficult to remember memories. But I said, what I know about Jerry is in his columns. So he said, well, can I use the information in those columns? And I said, that's the best way, because I would have to reread those columns to remind myself. All right, so that's what they did in the Birrell book. I understand. So we did try to make the magazine very, very different, and I left after a couple of years. I went to Surtees to be team manager there, but that's another story coming up.
We'll come to that, yeah.
And then other people stayed on. I mean, there was some great. I mean, Quentin Spurring, who was the editor of Autosport for twice, he was the editor of Autosport. He became the editor of Competition Car. Brilliant journalist, brilliant editor, lovely guy, still a good friend. Nigel Roebuck came in, it gave him his first opportunity to become a brilliant writer. Again, another brilliant journalist. Peter Windsor, he got his first chance with Autosport, with Competition Car, rather. Okay.
Wow.
So, and also Maurice Hamilton, another brilliant journalist. All were given their opportunities to get their work published by Competition Car. So
That's
it was
fantastic.
groundbreaking. It was a groundbreaking magazine. It lasted about 5 years, I think, before it eventually sort of succumbed to whatever. I'd gone by then. Funny enough, I was at Autosport when Competition Car finished.
Yeah, when it went pop. I mean, I didn't realize there were so many of those amazing names had their sort of had a break, due, thanks to Competition Car, which is fantastic.
Well, everyone's got to start somewhere. I mean, I remember the first time Justin and I interviewed, if that's the right word, Nigel Roebuck, and he was with a guy called John Kirkpatrick, who went on to run Jim Russell Racing Driver School for many, many years. I mean, Kilt, as we called him, Kilt's still around, as is the Roebuck. And Nigel had just come back from the Daytona 500, and he'd written this story. I think he'd written a story for Road and Track, or Car and Driver, one of those two, and got it published. And we and Justin said, right, I want a NASCAR front cover. So we had Richard Petty on the front cover, and Nigel did a piece on NASCAR racing. So and at that stage, neither Autosport or Motoring News were writing about things like NASCAR.
Sure.
So again, another groundbreaking. And in fairness to Justin, he was a very clever guy. Clever guy. A little bit of a Walter Mitty in some areas, but a clever guy. And he was, even though he and I sort of fell out, it was over money. It's like everything. It's like, why aren't you paying me? Oh, I've got no money. And I said, well, you're driving a Jaguar E-Type, and you've got no money, type thing. So I then basically saw an advertisement, or saw an opportunity. I don't think it was an advert. Saw an opportunity to go and work for Surtees, which I did. I went there, but I only lasted about a month because Big John was an absolute nightmare to work for, and I wasn't the only one that suffered. He was very, very difficult man.
This is John Watson, isn't it?
Well, this is when we ran John Watson in F2. I mean, the F1 team was Jochen Mass and Carlos Pache, both great guys. I mean, Jochen's still a very good friend of mine, and John was sort of seconded to the F2 team then. And I remember going to work when I turned up at Edenbridge. There was a guy in a little tiny bloke in a white coat, sweeping the floor in the stores, and it was Rennie Arnoux, and Rennie had been doing sort of Formula Renault at the time, and what had happened was that the late great French journalist Jaby Crombach, who was great friends with Colin Chapman, Jaby had said to Rennie, you must go to England to learn the language and learn about motor racing, because that is really where even though the French had their teams, Jaby said, you've got to go, and you must go. And he got him got him this job at in the stores at Edenbridge at Surtees. And I think I said to John, I said that this guy actually, this is the guy we should be putting in your Formula 2 car or whatever. We went to. It was funny. The race, the one and only race I did with Surtees was Hockenheim, April of that year, the Jim Clark Memorial Trophy. But it clashed.
The proper Hockenheim, isn't it? The proper in the
forest. The proper one. Yeah, the proper
real one.
The full circuit, which I've raced on, but that's another story. Okay. But it clashed with the Silverstone International Trophy. So Surtees was taking his 2 Formula One cars there, and I said, well, what have we got to take the F2 car? And he said, well, you take it on a trailer and pull it behind this Dodge Ram V8 pickup truck or whatever, or it was a closed Econoline type van or whatever. And I had two mechanics, I think it was, 2 guys. One of them still a very good friend, a guy called Andy Graves, who's now a professor, very, very, very well-respected academic at the University of Bath. Talk about mechanic making good. But he and I worked there, and we're still very, very good friends. He's got a great dry sense of humor. We went, and I said to him, we had no awning, okay, no awning. So all the other teams were there with their awnings and everything like that, or whatever. We had no awning, and luckily it wasn't raining. But I said, don't worry, I've got an idea. We'll do all the prep work for this car, in the shell garage outside the circuit. All right, outside the circuit. All right. So we did that, but then I forgot on race day. Okay, we were outside the circuit, and there were 100,000 people trying to get in. Okay. And we had to get the car in to do the warm-up, okay? Anyway, we did it, okay? We got it. But what was worse was that when we got to the track on the first day for practice, I was going through my checklist, all right? And I'd forgotten to pack the gear ratios. And I thought, oh, my God. And I didn't want to tell Witty at all because he would have gone ballistic. In fact, I don't think I've told him to this day, actually. I might next week or whatever, okay, when I see him. And I thought, what do I do? But luckily, Mike Earl was there, and he was running his team. I think it was the Banting Earl racing team, Burt. And so he was running Works Pygmies or whatever, pygmy cars, not pygmy people. And he knew Witty very well. So everyone was very, very, here, what ratios do you want for the... So we put the ratios in and everything like that. And anyway, it was a 2-part race, and Witty was just brilliant. I mean, and we came second overall. Anyway, I go and collect all the money that evening because you were paid in cash in F2 in those days. All right. So your second place, there was quite a lot of money, quite a few £1,000s, which was a lot of money in those days. So get it all in cash. So I drove home in my car, and the boys brought the race car back and behind the van, everything. I got home on the Monday, went straight to the bank, my bank, and I put it in. I said, can you transfer this to the Surtees account in Edenbridge, blah, blah, blah. I got all the paperwork. Said, right, okay. Went home, went to sleep, okay? I was knackered, all right? Tuesday morning, knock at the front door, and it's the police. And they say, Mr. Witty, I said, yeah. They said, we've been asked by Edenbridge Police to come and ask you for the money that you've withheld. And I said, what money? And they said, well, the money that you were apparently given at the race you were at the weekend. And I said, it's already in the bank. I said, I've already put it in the bank. And they said, oh, and I showed them the slip, okay? And they went, oh, thank you, sir, and whatever, you know. Anyway, I went into Surtees that day, and he was going ballistic. And I just said, A, I've taken the day off because I'm knackered. A, I've put your money in, okay? And he just went nuts. And I just said, oh, forget this. You know, I'm just not going to do this. So I quit on the spot. I just said, forget it. You know, that's the way you're going to operate. And funnily enough, my replacement, okay, was the late John Wickham, okay, who sadly died from motor neuron disease last year, right? Yeah. Lovely, lovely man. Been mates with John since he was at the BARC back in 71, 72, all right? He was competitions secretary there. And John replaced me. And he said to me years later, he said, God, he said, what a nightmare. He said, I was coming back from Sicily, okay? We had 3 cars down. I was bringing the spare car back behind this bloody truck that you had, this V8 van or whatever. And I had dysentery, okay? And I eventually got back to England on my own, all right? Went to bed for 3 days. And all he was just going ballistic, you know? And I went, yep. I said, well, that's the reason I left. And I think John took it out for a bit longer, but he was a very, very difficult man to work with. I think years later, wow. The funny thing is, years later, a good friend of mine, the photographer David Winter, David was talking to him, and I think David brought up my name, and he went, Witty chap, should have stuck to acting. Which always made me laugh.
You wouldn't have had all the grief.
Yeah, that was my experience. And then after that, a job came up at Autosport. Robert Fennell, the late Robert Fennell, who went on to look after Silverstone and then went on to work at Donington and run Donington. He was leaving, and a vacancy came up to take over his role. And there was me and another chap who I won't mention. Ian Phillips interviewed the pair of us and decided that I was probably a better partner at the bar at the Windsor Castle than the other chap. The rest is history.
Yes, fantastic. Oh, brilliant. Something I do want to come to is the F2 race at Donington, which you helped to get together. I just want to again have a quick look at comments here. Kike Mancia, good evening, Kike. What a top chap. We like Kike Mancia. He's lovely. He's tuning in.
Is he still filming the Senna movie out in Argentina?
Kike, pop that in the comments. You can answer that question if you so wish, my man.
Yeah, he was telling me the other week that how they've been filming all the Snetterton scenes at the Belarca or the Juan Manuel Fangio circuit. Been doing all Snetterton sort of, and then they've been doing Suzuka at the Buenos Aires track. They imported loads and loads of Japanese to make it look as if it was Suzuka. I'm looking forward to seeing this Netflix documentary on Senna. I think it's going to be a 4-part series about his life. Anyway,
he's just written "Yes, mates." He is still doing it. So
brilliant.
Everyone tune into that. That's going to be fantastic. Imported Japanese, wonderful, wonderful. Not like anything Japanese has ever been imported around the world, has it? Just want to say quick hello. We've got Bradley Gravitt who's in the mini challenge.
Yes, I know his dad.
He and Rob were the first ever guests on here. So evening, Brad, and Mandy's in as well. Mandy Gravitt, hello, Mandy.
Right. Hi, Mandy.
Hope to see you again. And I did see someone else, Chris McMahon. He said he's just checking in. Do I win the award for the longest distance check-in? He's in the Falkland Islands. Wow. I think that's between you and Kike, Chris. I think you might have beaten him.
Well, unless maybe Kike wants to invade him.
No comment.
Well, no, I mean that links us to the General Belgrano, the Toleman car from 1982, but that's another story,
which we're going to come to very, very quickly. I also want to say hello to Kales Cole. She's racing F1000. Very, very talented young Irish racer from Cork, and she's doing great things in F1000. So do go and give her a follow. Kales Cole Racing on social media. She is really, really places. Let's have a very quick look. I'm going to have a quick scroll through. We also, John Cavill. Evening, John. He said, one of my best lunches was with Chris, Ian Phillips and Joe Staywood. And Mike Watts said, why wasn't I invited? Maybe the phone was out of battery. I don't know.
No, sadly, that pub that John took us to, I think, has closed. I think we went there a couple of years ago, and I think I might have suffered through the COVID thing. But it was a lovely pub, sort of near Long Crendon, out in sort of Oxfordshire that way.
Yeah.
But,
that's a lovely area. Lovely area. Oh, hang on. He said, it depends how far south in Argentina Kike is. He's commissioned some wind turbines in Tierra del Fuego, utterly desolate southern Argentina. Okay, Kike I'm pretty sure Kike is in Buenos Aires, but yeah. Anyway,
I think he is. Well, he was when I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, wonderful, great stuff. Well, great to have you guys tuning in. This is very, very surreal, but it's very cool. We are going to come to that Toleman car very shortly, and there was a question earlier on about Toleman and Derek and Paul Warwick, which we're going to come to. But I wanted to. What we got here? Turning and burning. I'm not gas turbines. Sorry, Jim. Too far from my spot. Yeah, too far away. Yes, Kike's in Buenos Aires. Right, we digressed massively. Yeah, I just want to come back to that F2 race at Donington Park. What was it? Sort of mid 70s, and then you ran with Rupert Keegan, who is unfortunately not very well at the moment. But that must have been pretty cool, getting the F2 race together at Donington Park.
Well, it worked quite well because Ian had left Autosport at that stage and then gone to work for Witty. He got on extremely well with Tom Wheatcroft and Roger Williamson. Uh, Basically, Ian was circuit manager and he needed help. He just needed an extra pair of hands to go up and I went up and sorted out help with all the entries and everything. And I always remember afterwards, I think we said to Wheaty, we need, I don't know, it's 40 grand or something like that, all in cash. It had to be in Swiss francs or whatever, to pay all the teams afterwards. And that was great. That was great fun. I mean, I enjoyed doing that. And I spent a short amount of time up at Donington with Ian. We burnt the candle at both ends, and there's a pub called the Priest House which still exists, and there's a guy called John Shields who runs it, and Ian's still very good friends with John Shields, and yeah, it was just another facet to the bow, really, when it came to motor racing. You just turn your hand. I just wanted to turn my hand to anything and everything that was part of it. The only thing I haven't done is marshalling, and I have a lot of time for those guys that go out there and they're the first ones there in the morning and the last ones to leave in whatever weather conditions and stuff, and they're the salt of they are brilliant. Without them, the sport wouldn't exist. And even recently with the RAC, the Roger Albert Clark rally that's just taken place, the 5-day event. And
Tony Jardine was out there, wasn't he? He was doing some rallying.
Tony will be out there come hell or high water. I mean, I know Teach well and whatever. But what excited me was that there was this Lancia Stratus on it, and all the video clips, the YouTube, the TikTok clips, and everything of this cut. And it took me back to when Valdegaard, was rallying and the Stratus, back in the day. I can't remember the year or whatever. Must have been 74 around that time, 74, 75, because we were, and I just it made me remember back then. Rallying again was so different to what it is now. Okay, it's much more sanitized now. But we at Autosport, the guys that used to write the rallies, there was Peter Newton, who again is a good friend, and Ian Sadler, who's disappeared off the face of the earth. They were the two rally guys, and they would go on the rally to write the report. But the rest of us, myself, Ian Phillips, David Winter, Bob Constanduras, or whatever, we'd just go there, and we always knew that we had to be back on a Monday, but we would go and spend the time going to the stages, just drinking it all in, because it was just a phenomenal event. And God, do we miss it? And just watching the guys out in the stages, saying it's -4 and we're in Kiel de Forest and everything. That just took me back to when we used to do it on a regular basis, which is great.
That's fabulous. And we'll come to your involvement in rallying shortly. I was into it a little bit later in the 80s. I was like the Lancia Delta and the Audi Quattro and the Toyota Celica, the like Kanken and ON, that kind of era was my one. And Ari Vatanen in wasn't the Subaru, Mitsubishi and all that kind of thing. Those guys throwing it through the Kiel de Forest. It's just, whenever you see it back on YouTube or something, it's just better, isn't it? It's just it's kind of raw. I just love it.
It is. It's raw. It's just, well, I mean, we can't all live in the past. I mean, and I always look back and I go, I'm so pleased I lived in that period and I experienced it, and I keep those things to myself, and I enjoy talking to people who were there as well. Okay. I can't have those conversations with my son. Okay. Because he has no idea. He's got nothing to relate it to, really.
There's no frame of reference. Yeah,
he's got no reference point, really. So I never really discussed rallying with him at all.
Yeah, it was fantastic though. I loved it. Absolutely superb.
Oh, the sound, the sound in the forest. You go to somewhere like Grisdale up in the Lake Districts and stuff, and you just hear the bark of this sort of BDA engine or whatever, or whether it's a Stratus, and you just think, how far away is it? And sometimes it takes like 5 minutes to reach you, and then it bursts through the trees, and wow, and then it's gone again. But it's just, and you've walked 2 miles, or if not 3 miles, to get to this point, just to watch this blur go past you. But it just means so much.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Must have been wonderful. And obviously, you were involved with the World Rally Championship a little bit later on. Obviously, at this time, you're still, doing your journalist work. You're working with Autosport, doing some freelance work. Just a couple of things that you've sent to me via email in the last week or so. You track tested Rennie Arnoux F2 car. You sent me a photo of it, getting some tuition from Patrick Tombe. That must have been fun testing it. I mean, you also said in the email that it was quite a tight fit from memory.
Rennie's 5'3" and I'm 6'4". I mean, they did. In fairness, Patrick was taller. Okay, so the actual pedal assembly and everything I do remember was more for Patrick than it was for Rennie. We back then, the journalists, we used to track test an awful lot of cars. Okay, we were given. I mean, what Ian and I, what March did, what Robin Hurd and Max Mosley were very clever at doing. They always said, right, if we want the punters out there to know what we're selling for next year, right, we'll get Witty and Phillips to drive all the cars. So Robin would invite us down to Goodwood. We'd go and have a nice lunch in Goodwood House. Well, we'd drive cars in the morning, have a nice lunch, okay, and then drive the cars again in the afternoon. Only had a couple of glasses of wine or whatever. But we drive the F2, the F3, the Atlantic. I drove the 7.5, the sports car, and getting me in these things was difficult because I have big feet and I stuck out, whatever. But what Elf used to do, and Elf were brilliant. They as an oil company. I mean, we had BP, Les Thacker, who was their motorsports manager, Ray Cunningham at Shell, Ron Carnell at Duckham's. All these guys were brilliant, okay, in promoting their brand through motorsport, okay. But what Elf did, they had a guy called Francois Guiter, and he was a larger-than-life character. But he decided that in order to get Elf out and about and as a brand, that he would sponsor all the French drivers, pretty much all the French drivers. So he realized, and I think a compliment that we were given once, although L'Equipe, which was the daily sports paper, and Sport Auto and other magazines, Auto Hebdo, those the leading French magazines, Autosport was respected by the French, okay, and the French drivers would always be very helpful, and Peroni, Tombe, Leclerc, Arnoux, all of them, Jabouille, whatever, and they were always very helpful. And Guiter would, at the end of every year, they would always invite all the journalists to Paul Ricard and say, right, you can drive. In this case, it was Alain Prost's Formula Renault. Okay, so he hadn't even got to Formula 3 yet. Okay. Then there was an or maybe it was Alain Prost's F3 car as well. I think he got up to F3. And then they had the two F2 cars, and then they had the Alpine Renault Le Mans car. Okay, and excuse me. So we drove all of the cars apart from the Le Mans car, where they said to me, "Okay, it's your turn." I mean, there were other journalists there. There was Motoring News there. There were guys from German magazines and whatever. And they said to me, right, you can get in with Jabouille. And I went, oh, okay, fine. I thought, but he's tall, all right. Jean-Pierre was tall, bless him. So they managed to sort of shoehorn me alongside him. And I've got this wonderful picture in my office of me sort of sitting next to him, sort of talking with our helmets on. I had an AGV at the time or whatever. And then we did several laps of Paul Ricard. And I have to say, going into Scene, in the passenger seat with Jabouille driving was wow, that was quite something. And I enjoyed it. And then later in the day, they said, would you like to go out again with Peroni? And I said, yeah, okay. They said, well, we're giving him a fresh set of tires just to bed in, but you might as well go with him. So I went out with Didier and we did a couple of laps and came back in. And he said, how was that? And I went, I think Jean-Pierre was a lot better, just to wind him up, you know. But we were privileged to sort of are able to do things like that, you know, because there was a much smaller group of journalists. I mean, there was the little core group of Italians, a core group of Germans, core group of French, core group of the British, and so we all knew each other as journalists. We all got on. We all respected each other. Okay, so these things were part of our privileges, you know, whatever, you know.
Wow, that's incredible. That must have been amazing down the old.
I mean, I was hopelessly slow. I mean, you know, the problem is because I could never get comfortable in these things. You know, I was better. I think I was better in the big saloon, in touring cars and things like that, where there was a bit more room that you could sort of at least fit in there. But single seaters were disaster. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned obviously, you know, we lost Mr. Jabri was it last year, wasn't it, or earlier this year? Very sad.
Yeah.
His passing. You mentioned obviously there's like Didier Pironi, and sort of your story intertwined with his with powerboats and things, which we're going to come to. You had like Pironi, but you also got quite friendly with like Gilles Villeneuve around that time, and I'm sure there's a few stories about Gilles, but I mean, obviously everyone who I've spoken to, whoever met him, had just said what a lovely chap he was. Usually, I guess was that the case with you, with Gilles?
Well, the thing with a lot of these drivers is that when you met them and got to know them before they got swallowed up by Formula One, okay, that's when you really got to know their characters. The problem is that, you know, when they got into Formula One, they became it became their full-time occupation. Okay, I mean, even the day Gilles died, okay, I wasn't really talking to him that much at Ferrari because you tended to stick with your team. I was with Toleman. He's at Ferrari. He's at the other end of the pits or whatever. But Gilles, I got to know when we went out to South Africa. I think it must have been, when did Tom Price get killed? Was it 76 or 77?
77, I think, was Price.
77, yeah, okay, it was 70. So we went out, we were invited out, or Gilles was invited out because he'd won the Canadian Formula Atlantic Series. And they wanted Ted Wentz to go, the American guy who'd won the British Formula Atlantic Series in his Weller-sponsored Lola. They wanted him to go, but I don't think Lola were in a position to send a car. So they said, right, well, okay, we'll take the British F3 champion, and that was Rupert Keegan. And what I will say at this point is that I spoke to Rupert earlier this evening. He's going in for a serious operation tomorrow, an 8-hour operation. In St Mary's Hospital in Paddington, and I'm sure those that know him and those that don't all wish him well. He's a bit anxious, okay, but you know, Rupert is poorly, but unfortunately, cigarettes and red wine haven't helped, okay. But I'm very fond of him, and I've known him since, you know, he was in Formula Ford and whatever. So I wish him well, you know, from that point of view.
Yes, so, if Rupert does see this, then we're all wishing you very well.
Yeah. Hopefully, yeah. Okay. Anyway, so I went out there. I managed to Max Mosley, bless him, and Robin. I mean, more Max. I said, look, I need an Atlantic car, and I've got no money to buy it, but I want to run Rupert, and he's been invited. So Max was very good. He just said, look, he said, I'll let you have a brand new car chassis, on the proviso that you sell it when you're out there. I don't want the car back. You've got to sell it. So I managed to do a deal with the sponsor that the car would be bought at the end of the series. Okay. And I told Rupert not to crash it. Okay. Which was a little bit nervous, but I said, please don't crash it. Sort of, otherwise we're in Stuck here or whatever. So Rupert and I went, and I went with a mechanic called Chris Crawford, and Chris is still around, and Chris actually owns one of those gorgeous Rothmans Porsches, a 956, I think a Beloff car. I saw Chris. He doesn't live too far from me, but I saw him at Silverstone at the festival, not this year, but last year. Okay. Anyway, we went out there, and then Chevron basically sent Paul Owens, who was the Chevron boss man then, and ran the race team, and Gilles. So that was the first time that Rupert and I had ever met him. And we're out there for 2 months, traveling around South Africa, from Pietermaritzburg to Durban to Welkom, to Cape Town, to Kyalami or whatever. And we had a pickup truck, which we took the car on the back with a trailer, and we got to know each other. You do. I mean, you just, the South African drivers, which was Ian Schechter and Tony Martin and Roy Klomfas and all those guys, they'd go home after the races, but we would just sort of cruise around and see the country. So got to know Gilles very well, very, very well indeed. And I mean, he was he was a good boy. He was completely mad. I mean, he destroyed my rental car. I remember we were driving along one day, and I'm doing about 60 miles an hour, and he's in the front seat, and it was an automatic, and he just goes, rams it into reverse, locks, just totally destroys the transmission, car spins, and he's just laughing, and whatever. And I'm just absolutely apoplectic with rage because, it's my effing car, whatever, and stuff like that. And then Rupert's in the back, playing silly buggers and whatever, stuff like that. But no, he was a great guy. I mean, I saw him win some fantastic races, particularly the race at Jarama, where he held them all off for the entire Grand Prix, that famous race.
It was about six across the line in about a second and a half, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, he just had the power down the straights and held them through the corners. I mean, it was a perfect race for Gilles. But I was fond of him. But I have to say, when he was having accidents and things, I mean, all the quick drivers do, because they just push it to the limit, and then I think their sort of hero worship sort of starts to evolve, because the more shunts they've had, the more they become a hero, really, from that point of view. I mean, he flew his helicopter, some of the places he came into and some of the things he was doing. I mean, it's phenomenal, but spooky. So I don't know. It was a horrific end, and it was unfortunate. I mean, Derek Warwick was the next car on the scene, or the next I
spoke to Derek about it, and he
came back to our race truck, and there was just me and Alex Hawkridge in the back, and he came in, and Derek's a tough guy, and he was broken up, and he just said, let's get this practice restarted. I just got to get back into the car and strap myself in and just focus on what I've got. The longer it took to get practice going again, the more he got more of the emotions got to him, really, from that point of view.
Yeah.
But funny enough, I about a month or so ago, I spoke to Joanne, Gilles' widow, out in Canada, and we had a bit of a chat and stuff. And I was asking her, I think I told her that I'd seen the film that was on just before last Christmas, which was Didier and Gilles, whatever. And I just said, I mean, I know she wasn't very happy about it, and the way it was portrayed. And I just said, I agree with you, Joanne. I mean, I don't know. It's wrong to talk of people, but I always felt with Didier and also his half brother Jose Dolem, who I knew, they were a little bit aloof, in that respect. Yeah, I mean, it's someone asked me about what my comments were. They were writing a book on Peroni, and I preferred not to really say anything. I mean, great racer, okay, Grand Prix winner and all that lot, but. I felt what he did perhaps at San Marino, and I was there because it was a strange race. It was just the Grandee team, so there were two Tolemans in that race, and none of the Fokker cars were there or whatever.
Yeah, because they'd all boycotted, hadn't they?
There was a Bernie boycott.
Political thing.
Bernie was good at his boycotts and whatever. But I also knew, I mean, I think a lot of people blamed Marco Piccinini for the politics that went on, and I knew Marco, and I haven't spoken to him in years. I mean, he's still involved. I mean, his family were bankers, and he is in the banking industry and whatever. Politics, whatever, I don't know. Whatever happened, it happened, certainly later, I had no issues with Marco when we were basically helping Stefan Johansson get the drive at Ferrari, to replace Arnoux, which we did, which Alex Hawkridge and I managed to arrange. So that was that.
Yeah, wonderful. Obviously, still kind of a touchy subject on the back of the film that came out, but
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, the thing is, what you've got to remember is that people who make these films weren't there. Okay, so they can just take the documentary footage, they'll just do interviews, and then they piece it together. All right, and it's sort of their interpretation. I mean, there a lot of films that come out. Sometimes I have to see them twice, because if I see a film first, like Ford v Ferrari, okay, I go, technically it's not quite right, and then I
yeah,
look at it again and I think, actually, some of the scenes with Christian Bale and Matt Damon are brilliant. If you can
yeah,
take the racing sequences away from a lot of these films,
yes,
they're a lot
yeah.
better. I mean, I never enjoyed Rush, okay, and I never went to see it initially, and a couple of
I was
journalists
I
said
was
to me,
just going to mention Rush because I spoke to John Watson and Mario about it, and they said, well, and I spoke to Freddie Hunt as well about it, and yeah, Freddie wasn't complimentary about it, but he just said obviously it's not meant to be a documentary, but they said it was a bit Hollywood, and yeah, he said there was a bit too much other stuff
yeah,
going on with it
it was
from the reality.
it was unusual, yes, because it was written by Peter Morgan, who wrote The Crown, and when I was watching some of the early series of The Crown, okay, and then I thought, hang on, he a lot of Rush was not necessarily accurate, and I began to think, they're writing these things for Hollywood. They're writing it for a much broader audience. Okay, so I keep saying to myself, don't take it seriously. Don't try. I mean, with Rush, I thought the guy who played Dennis Bruhl or whatever, no, what was his name?
Daniel Bruhl, Daniel
Bruhl.
Bruhl,
Yeah, I thought he was
he was
brilliant at Nicky. I mean,
fabulous. Yeah,
absolutely brilliant. And I think the people that played that. I think Chris Hemsworth did a poor version of James. Okay, and I
Freddie
know.
Hunt said the same thing.
Yeah, and I know I have a friend who's related to the Hunt family, and I know him from our local cricket club, and I know that the Hunt family were disappointed, but with the way that Chris portrayed him, from that point of view, and then some of the other smaller performances, I mean, were weren't as good as they could have been, perhaps. But anyway, it is what it is. I mean, getting back to the thing about Ford v Ferrari was that when you look at what it cost and what it made, okay, like, I don't know, nearly 8 times what it cost, or certainly 5 or 6 or whatever, it's deemed a hit. It's a hot, the Americans loved it, so,
Yeah.
what am I to say, right or wrong?
Well, what was it? They were saying, "Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story," or that kind of thing, isn't it? And I guess that artistic license has been used. But yeah, I mean, just quickly on that, I mean, just going back to Rush with Freddie Hunt, he said obviously Daniel Bruhl was able to speak to Nicky to get the character and get it right and things like that, which obviously Chris Hemsworth didn't have that with James. But he said apparently not once did he ever contact the Hunt family to arrange any meeting or anything like that to try and get an insight. He just went and did what he perceived. Played the perceived role, as it were.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's the way it's going to be, really. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I don't really, people have said to me in the past, like with Rush, do you want to be in it or whatever? And I said, not particularly, really. I mean, it was my era, for sure. That season I was at Autosport, sports editor at Autosport. But no, not really. I mean, people, I've been in the business and I know how the film business works. Okay. And I would probably do it differently. And that's all I really want to say about it,
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you mentioned you were around at the time. Obviously, the crux of that movie and even of the era, one of the most famous incidents of the era was Nicky's crash at the Nürburgring. I mean, we spoke briefly about it off air, and we spoke about that accident, and with like Gunnar Nilsson and his illness at the time. Obviously, you were very much in the media at the time. I mean, you told me something amazing off air, and if you could repeat that to everyone who's listening about the story that you wrote about the accident and
about Nicky's accident.
About Nicky, are we going to get this right? Because it was a fascinating insight that you said to me.
Well, it was like, I mean, my responsibility back in those days was to write the gossip pages of Autosport, which was usually 5 or 6 pages of news. Okay, right. And we'd had the accident, and Ian Phillips and I were discussing, are we about to write an obit, or are we, what position are we in? Because, in those days, Autosport would go to press on a Tuesday night. Okay. If you were very lucky, you'd get it at a rail station on the Wednesday evening, but normally it would arrive on everyone's in the race factories or everyone's doorstep on a Thursday morning. Okay. And what you sort of didn't want, you wanted to be as topical or newsworthy as you could, knowing that you had 36 hours of dead time effectively,
Right.
So we were getting all the information back from Germany about Nicky's condition, and it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. So I'm sort of writing, we're all, Ian's sort of doing his bit, and we're all doing, and I'm thinking, I've got to finish this this piece, and is it going to be an obit, or is this going to be, to be continued type thing, ... So we did. We left it open because Nicky was alive, by the time we went to press, whatever. And I think I remember years later, I said something to him like, God, bloody, we didn't know whether to put an obit in or whatever, and he made some Nicky comment or whatever, which was typical Nicky. I can't remember exactly what, but it was a laugh and whatever and stuff like that, But he. Again, he was a remarkable guy. I mean, I first met him when he was doing F2, when he was part of the March team, and he paid his money to drive, Works March, and Ronnie was the front guy, 71, that was his 712M or whatever and stuff like that. And even when he went to BRM and stuff like that. And I always remember he became very friendly with James, because James was very charismatic, and people warmed themselves to James, and I remember, I think we were driving down, I don't know how I was in the car, but there was James, Nicky, and myself driving down High Street Ken, and I wanted to go home. Maybe I think we'd been testing at Silverstone, and the great thing in those days was that because the driver, everyone would talk to each other. Someone would say, James would say, "Oh, I'm testing for McLaren at Silverstone today," and I said, "Oh, can I come up? Can I get a lift?" Yeah, you come up, whatever. So we'd go to Silverstone, and then Nicky would say, "Oh, I need a lift back to London," or whatever. So you'd find yourself in the cars with these guys and chatting away and everything like that. And we got back, and I said, "Oh, I need to get out," and Nicky was going, "Where are we going, James? Which club are we going to tonight? Which club?" And James said, "Oh, I don't know, whatever." And Nicky desperately wanting to sort of, like he'd been released, and suddenly he was in London, and he had James, to take him to all these clubs and whatever. And he was a brilliant guy. I mean, I think there's not anyone in this world that didn't dislike Nicky in everything that he did, and just a brilliant bloke.
That's wonderful. I love that. Fantastic. Excuse me. I did see something which we're going to come back to actually in the comments. We'll come back to that shortly. Just sort of fast forward, there was a lot of, just forward into the early 80s. And you got the call from like Toleman to go and do was it like the sponsorship and comms and PR and that kind of a thing with the Toleman team?
Sort of everything, really. It was
everything but the driving.
Well, I mean, put it this way: if it was a current Formula One team, there'd be about 30 positions. Okay, whereas back in those days, one size fits all type thing. Alex Hawkridge, I was doing F2. I was a correspondent, really, in sort of the late 70s. I mean, there was a number of us doing F2 reports, but I tended to write most of the seasonal surveys at the end of the year on F2, and I was at Enna, which was sort of late August, sort of 79, I think it was. Yeah, the 79. Alex just said to me, do you want to write about racing cars for the rest of your life? And I said, no, not particularly. Why? And he said, well, I like what you write. Next year we're going to build our own F2 cars. We're going to win the championship, and then we're going to go Formula One, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And normally, a normal person might turn around and go, "Oh, forget it." And I just thought, "Wow, that sounds exciting. Wow, that." And I said, "Count me in," type thing, you know. So he said, I said, you know, "Where do you want me to work?" And he said, "I don't want you to work at the factory, the race factory in Witney. I want you to work at Toleman Group HQ, and I want you on the same floor as me in an office at the end of the hallway or whatever. And I want you so I can talk to you whenever I want, you know." And that's really how we develop our relationship. I mean, for me, it was, I mean, he was the boss of the team. Roger Silman initially was the team manager who ran Witney effectively. Rory ran the design shop, everything. But all the things relating to sponsors, marketing, PR, politics, drivers, and everything, really, I was engaged with Alex on that on a daily basis. So we'd sort of choose drivers pretty much together. I mean, and it was just, you know, the Senna, Warwick, Henton, Giacomelli, Fabi, all those guys, and Chicotto. You know, I had a lot to do with most of those guys coming, apart from Henton and Warwick, because they were already there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But certainly, you know, Teo, Bruno, Chicotto, and to a degree Ayrton. I mean, you know, when we were looking to replace Warwick, because we'd let Warwick go to Renault, because Alex said, "I'm not going to stand in your way. You deserve it. You know, you deserve to go to a front running team." It was like, right, who are we going to get? And what I will say about Toleman's is that the only driver that ever brought money to the team, okay, was Chicotto. And Alex,
right, okay,
yeah, I mean,
so
everyone
he
else,
was doing well on two wheels, and he'd been racing for a while, hadn't he?
well, yeah, he'd been 350 world champion on bikes. All right, he'd come into F2, done a very good job in F2, nearly won the championship. I think he only lost it on countback or for F2 for March. Then he came in with Theodore, and he was. I'd identified him as a very solid midfield runner. You know, a guy who had ability. Okay. And he was, you know, he'd always, you know, I thought, well, he'll always qualify the car, you know, mid-grid or whatever, or maybe in the top 10 or something like that, you know, depending how good your car was. But he also had a good sponsor in Segafredo, which was an Italian coffee company.
Yeah.
So we were, because we were paying Senna, or and budgets, you know, the whole thing about racing is money. You know, the more money you have, the more you progress, you know, from that point of view. So we decided that for 84 that we would actually have to take a pay driver in Johnny, which we did. But everyone else, I mean, well, I mean, Senna we paid. I think Bruno and Fabi, they might have got something, I can't remember, but certainly the reason they were in the team was that we had a lot of Italian sponsors, and they were quite good, like Candy, the domestic supply company, you know, washing machines and all those things.
Yeah.
They weren't there because they wanted to sell more washing machines through Formula One. They were there because the boss man, a guy called Peppino Fumagalli, was passionate. Their base was in Monza. You know, they were just passionate about motor racing. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why they were in motor racing, or, you know, with the Tyrrell and all the other teams that they were associated with, whatever. So they said, as long as you have an Italian in the team, we will carry on sponsoring you. Right. So, you know, I went to
Taylor with Brabham a couple of years later, wasn't it, with Pretty and De Angelis, and they wanted the Italians because of Olivetti and all that.
Olivetti and Parmalat and things like that. Yeah. So you know, I mean, they were quite good. They weren't stipulating you've got to have this guy or that guy or whatever. So so that's really what I did. I mean, I remember, funnily enough, when I remember when we were the first year with Formula One with the Tolemans, we were hopeless. I mean, and there were reasons behind why we were hopeless. And the Italian journalists were just, you know, circling, you know, it's like circling our wagon, you know, like Indians and whatever. And they wanted to just tear us apart, you know, and I remember one top Italian journalist coming up to me. I mean, sadly, he passed away a few years ago from COVID, but a guy called Nestor Morosini, who wrote for the one of their top top newspapers or whatever. And he said, "Your car is shit, and this is crap, and everything like that, and whatever." And I said, "You're absolutely right." Okay. I said, "We're absolutely struggling." I used other words and whatever. And he sort of looked at me, because he was expecting me to be defensive and whatever. I said, "Totally agree with you." I said, "If that's how you feel, write it." Now, the reason I adopted that approach was, having been a journalist, I knew exactly what a journalist would want to ask. Okay. So I never lied to a journalist. I didn't necessarily always tell the truth. Okay. So I was economical with the truth, but I never lied. Okay. And I gained the respect. I'd like to think I gained the respect of certainly the Italians. So eventually, they became fans of Toleman. Certainly in '83, when we were running Giacomelli and Warwick. But the funny thing was, at the end of '83, when we signed Ayrton, I went back to Italy to look for more sponsors. Okay, and I was going, "We've got this young Brazilian hot shoe," and they're all going, "Yeah, yeah. Who? What's he done? Whatever." And I'm thinking, if only you guys knew what you've got, what I'm offering you, and yet 2 or 3 years later, they're all sort of drooling over him and sort of,
Yeah.
licking his feet, so to speak. I'm going, "We know, you don't. Just give us the money."
Yeah. Wow. And obviously, we'll come on to Ed very shortly. I must admit, I tried. This is because I always try and get different guests on here with different stories, and I tried to get in contact with Teo Fabi last year or early this year, and honestly, I got more chance of finding Lord Luke, and I think I found a contact for him at a company, but there's no chance. But he was seriously underrated, wasn't he? He went to IndyCar, did really well. I think he put it on pole, I think, and he, in the Indy 500, and yeah, he's one of those guys who doesn't get mentioned a lot when you talk about, say, like the '80s in F1. Everyone talks about, the other drivers being like Patrese and maybe Derek and guys like Eddie Cheever and people like that. No one ever mentions Teo Fabi, and they really should. I think he was a very, 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 very good driver.
He's I saw Teo about 5-6 years ago, and he and his brother, unfortunately, they sort of don't talk, or they weren't talking sort of 5 or 6 years ago, whatever.
Yeah.
And Corrado sort of runs the family business up in the mountains, which is basically where it was talc mining for talcum powder. Okay. And Teo runs he's like property business. I mean, the last time I spoke to Teo, he was developing some apartments or whatever overlooking one of the gorgeous lakes or whatever. And he said to me, "Next time you come to Milan, please come with me to Como or whatever," and stuff like that. He's actually quite a private person.
I thought I probably got ignored for that reason.
Yeah, and I think unless he knows who you are, he's not going to respond.
Which is fair enough. Fair enough.
So I saw him. I mean, unfortunately, he had a very bad year with us. I mean, the 1982 car was a dog. Okay, and that's all he had to drive that year. And the problem with the team in those first 2 years was that we were trying to develop something new. I mean, Bernie Eccleston had said to Alex Hawkridge from the outset, "I don't know why you're going this way. Just stick a DFV in the back." And Alex said, "Well, actually, within 3 years, DFV will be dead." And it was. You had to go turbo. And we were doing our own thing. And so every time we went racing throughout 81 and 82, particularly 81, it was a public test session. So we go to Imola for the first Grand Prix, and we're 8 seconds off the back row, let alone the front row or whatever. Or it's something ridiculous, like maybe it's 4 seconds and 8 seconds off pole or something like that. But we just, it was, if we'd have been allowed to do it, we would have just spent all that year testing. But we couldn't. You needed to pay for it somewhere. So, Candy, in a way, were paying for our public testing, really. And I know that when we qualified for our first Grand Prix, which was Monza of that year, of 1981, all right, Henton got onto the back row. He wasn't the slowest. He was 23rd, okay, out of 24. And there were another 4 non-qualifiers. Because what you got to remember, when we went racing back then, points were only awarded to the first 6
Top
out of
6.
24. So only a quarter of the participants got points, okay? Whereas today, 50% get points, okay? So if you actually apply what we were doing then to what teams are doing now, I look at it, I go, well, if we're running 5th and 6th or 4th and whatever, which we were at the end of 83, we're probably we're doing better than Alpine, and we're probably doing what McLaren are doing, in terms of, and a lot of people, forget, and that's what I quite like reminding people about. Now I've looked back on it years later, is that we were punching above our weight, but getting back to the Hendon thing, he qualifies, and all the teams from the other, they all come to the back row and they're all shaking hands with our mechanics, going, well done, and everything. I mean, that was the camaraderie that Formula One had then, and Henton went round, and we recorded this quite recently. I think it went on to 3 cylinders after about 2 laps, okay? But he said nothing happened. He just was on 3 cylinders, and he finished the race 10th, okay, last and 10th. Would have been a point now, or whatever. And it was a breakthrough. It was in front of our Italian sponsors, okay, and there was so much goodwill and everything that they sort of almost forgot about the dreadful performances leading up to it, okay. But it was a breakthrough, and then the following year we upgraded the car, but we were always, the problem was that the Hart engine, because it was a monoblock, which meant that there was no cylinder head. The reason for that was we were trying to get rid of the heat. Okay, the massive amount of heat soak in this engine or whatever, and so Rory was just having to bolt radiators on, oil cooler here, water radiator there. So the car looked so ugly because we were just trying to keep the engine cool. So I remember when we were designing the 183, okay, which was the end of 82, okay, Alex and we went to the workshop and see the first mock-up, and we said to Rory, can you please make this car more attractive, because it's so difficult to sell it to sponsors, and Rory would say, if it works, it works, I don't care bloody hell, about, it's there to go quickly, however it looks,
And it's not for the aesthetics, yes.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But he proved later that he could design very pretty cars. I mean, these guys are so brilliant. I mean, Adrian Newey, Rory Byrne, 2 of the cleverest men that sort of have ever been in Formula One. Okay?
2 of the best.
Yeah, 2 of the best. Because although Chapman was clever, he had other guys that sort of drew the cars. I mean, Rory did a lot of. I mean, John Gentry was our draftsman, but Rory came up with a lot of the ideas, and the same with Adrian today. He'll come up with concepts, and he's got a team of people there that do all the work. Okay, but their understanding, they were very clever guys, and I think certainly Rory prefers the. If Rory had carried on, I mean, he did carry on for a long time with Ferrari, but he's old. I mean, Rory's 80 in January, whereas Adrian's a lot younger. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Adrian's had a head start, I suppose, in that way, in terms of Grand Prix wins or whatever. But anyway. Yeah.
So he's amazing, absolutely amazing guy. On the subject, very quickly, this question came up quite early on, actually, and I've come back to it. I'm going to try and pronounce your name. I hope this is correct. This is a question from what I think is Witolda Maroszewska. I think that's right. Do correct me if I'm wrong. Sounds right. He is a self-confessed nerd. He says it in his comment. And he said he has a picture of the very first outing of the Toleman TG 181 at Goodwood.
Right.
He's got a photo that he got sent of the car. The photo was taken of the car in the paddock with an 11-year-old Paul Warwick standing in the background.
Right.
He'd love to stick a date on that, as not knowing is driving him potty. Do you know roughly when that would have been?
That would have been sort of February time in 81, because the first prototype we put the Hart engine in the back of an F2 car, and I think both Brian and Derek thought, wow, because the power was just phenomenal with small F2 wheels and everything. They just thought, wow, we're gonna blitz the championship next year. But by the time we put the engine in a proper Formula One chassis, it was a slightly different feeling. But that would have been February 81, because we debuted Imola in April with the car. Yeah.
Super. There you go. I'm sure that answers the question. And sorry, it's she. Sorry, apologies. I can't see your picture from here.
Okay. That's down to you, not me. Okay.
Hands up. Sorry. Right, we have to talk about Ayrton Senna. Obviously, a lot of people will. He is the guy of their era. When he arrived at the team, I mean, this was a silly question after obviously what he'd done previously in Carter, Terry Fullerton, and all the F3 with Martin Brundle and all that. Was it very, very obvious that he was very, very good?
Yeah.
When he first turned up. I mean, it feels like a daft question, but I've got to ask it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He was difficult to. I mean, we approached him in '82, Alex and I, when he was doing FF 2000. Alex said, "If we can sign you up on a long-term contract, we'll pay for your F3 season with Dick Bennett." And he said no. He said, "I'll make my own decisions on who I drive for, and I'll pay my own budget for F3." So we got pushback then. I know McLaren were talking after him, because Crichton Brown, bless him, no longer with us, but Crichton was one of Ron Dennis's partners, and Crichton had a massive, great Brazilian pig farm. Crichton was in the pig farming business. And Crichton had Crichton's wife, Terry. They were obviously aware of Ayrton, the rise of Ayrton. So they were sniffing around. But the thing was that neither McLaren, Williams, or Brabham could actually offer him a seat for that season, for 84. Okay. So we were sort of the new kids on the block, but we'd been doing well. I mean, I have to say, the end of '83, we were constantly finishing in the top 6. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and he drove that car at Silverstone. He was incredibly self-assured, for a 23-year-old. I mean, it makes me smile. I look at the young driver tests at Abu Dhabi, and and they're all going round and everything, and sort of probably thinking, well, mustn't bend it and whatever and thing. And just got into it. It was a bit like, okay, I'm Ayrton. I'm just going to drive the wheels off this thing. And the end of the, still day, cold day, turbos love it. He went a second quicker than Warwick had gone at the Grand Prix. Okay. But you expected the car to be quicker, but it was just his self-confidence. And then Rory just said to Alex, we got to have this kid, or this guy and whatever. I did the initial negotiations sitting in his Alfa Sud at the hanger lane gyratory system going through his. I mean, he was fastidious about the contract, and then I remember we went back to head office and with Alex, and he was there, and we were there until I'd left by then, but Alex said they stayed until about 2 a.m. in the morning with an open line to his manager, who only spoke Portuguese, back out in Brazil, working out the contract. And the toughest clauses were the release, which ironically came into effect. Okay, but he wanted to make sure that he could get out of this 3-year contract, because Ayrton's view was, I'm on my way to the top. You're one ladder, and then Lotus will be another, and then I'll get there with McLaren type thing, and we were just left in his slipstream effectively, I mean,
I guess a lot of young drivers would have just almost been, yes sir, no sir, bend over backwards to get me into the seat, sir. But obviously Ayrton was obviously different. He was kind of, well, I'm going to the top, and I have to leave you guys behind. I will.
No, absolutely. I mean, I knew him quite well that year. I spent quite a lot of time with him, and we talked about lots of different things, about life and stuff and whatever. But he was supremely confident. But he didn't like being told that he was wrong. I mean, he wasn't always right. Okay, I mean, but it was a bit like, well, why am I wrong? I mean, I remember Pat Simmons saying, or we said to him early on in '84, he was a slip of a guy. I mean, there was nothing on him. Okay, he was used to 20-minute Formula 3 races, and suddenly you're putting him into a 2-hour Grand Prix, and he was knackered. I mean, the first, that race in South Africa, where he got his first World Championship points. I mean, he was absolutely, dehydrated at the end of the race. So it took him a long time to accept that he had to step up his game. Okay. Because we were progressing with the car, we were getting better turbochargers, better management systems, better tires when we got the Michelins, a better car with the 184. So all those things, that's all part of a package which he was able to extract the best out of. It wasn't him just getting into a shitbox, excuse my language, and suddenly getting on the podium. Everything had to sort of, and that's the same today with Verstappen or whatever with Max. He has to have the car and the team and everything behind him to allow him to sort of deliver,
And that's the same for any driver, isn't it? I mean, people are saying it about Max. I said it about Lewis recently. They're saying, "Oh, it is only there because of the car." It's like, well, I've also, the car kind of helps in racing, doesn't it? I mean, you're gonna have to run pretty quick, aren't you?
Yes. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
I've always said, show me someone in the last 40 odd years or more who's won the championship not in the best car, and the only one I can think of is Keke Rosberg with Williams.
Yeah, he won one race. I mean,
consistent.
Through consistency. I mean, that was. But in fairness,
every champion has had the best car. The car is quite important, and it's used as a put down. It's like, well, no, you need the car.
I mean, the other thing, and I was looking at the stat the other day, and I was going to comment on it, but I thought no. But now's an opportune time. When was the last time a non-Red Bull, non-Mercedes won the World Championship? And it was 2009. 13 years ago, and it was Jenson Button in the Brawn,
which then became Mercedes.
Sorry, powered, yeah. But that was by luck because they happened to, Ross produced a car with the trick diffuser, okay,
the double diffuser,
and then no one could catch up. They won the first 6 Grand Prix or something like that, So when I talk about dominance and people say racing's boring, I mean Vettel won 4 championships on the trot. Max hasn't even got there yet. All right, Lewis won God knows how many by Rosberg.
5 out of 6 or something, wasn't it? Yeah.
So you can't blame Red Bull or Mercedes. You have to look at the others and say, what are you guys doing? Particularly Ferrari. Ferrari.
We've been saying that for a while, though, haven't we?
We have. But but you have to keep saying it. I mean, they just for the mega team that they are, okay, they haven't delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that subject, people of my kind of age, we all look sort of look back to misty-eyed. For us, it's like the late 80s and the early 90s, saying, "Oh, Senna and Prost, and it was fantastic, great battle within the same team, and all that." And McLaren were completely dominant in '88. I think it was only Ferrari won at Monza, fittingly. And we look back on Senna and Prost at McLaren dominating with great fondness, but then when it was Hamilton against Rosberg, Mercedes, it was like, oh, this is a bit boring, isn't it? No one else is getting a look in, and it's like, well, it's the same thing. It's literally the same thing. It's just attitude change, isn't it?
I think, in fairness, and this maybe someone will shoot me down for this. I think the Hamilton Rosberg era was that I think Lewis was a better driver. Okay, than Nico. I think the fact that Nico retired at the end of that year, I think it took a lot out of him. Okay, mentally.
I think he gave everything, didn't he?
I think he gave it. The difference between Prost and Senna was that they were pretty much equal. I mean, Alan Prost is a much underrated driver. Okay, the problem was that Senna.
He's always compared to Senna, which is unfair.
But Senna refused to be beaten. His view was, I am the best, and there's no one out there that's going to be quicker than me. And if you are, I'm going to take you off. And he did it in Formula Ford. He did it in Formula 3. And he did it in Formula 1. Okay. So his view was, right, there's a gap. Again, this wonderful quote: if there's a gap and you don't go for it, you're not a racing driver. Yeah. Okay. If there's a gap and you go for it, you take the other guy out. Okay. Then fine. I remember saying to Rupert Keegan, bless him, who took Giacomelli out at the controversial final round of the F3 Championship. And Rupert said to me afterwards, still to this day, he said, I did it on purpose because I knew if Bruno got the jump on me, I'd never catch him. So I took him out. Okay. I think, and I think some drivers, and I think Ayrton was one, he was prepared, right. We're both going off, and that's the way it is. He was ruthless in a way, but he was such a kind guy in other ways. I mean, he gave huge amounts of money to charity. privately, and was very concerned. Was a very deep religious thinking guy, but almost godlike, I suppose. He had very strong spirituality. No, can't pronounce the word, but spiritual sort of presence about him in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and obviously terribly sad when we lost him. I mean, it's been spoken about many, many times, and yeah, a real loss. But no, it's great to hear your insights on a young Ayrton. And you sent me a lovely photo of you in conference with him and a couple of other people while at Toleman, which was lovely.
Oh, right. The one with Pat Simmons holding his clipboard, but I jokingly say he's actually taking a McDonald's order.
Testing the other day.
A Big Mac with chips,
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, just one more thing on Ayrton. There's a road about a quarter of a mile behind me named after him. It's called Ayrton Senna Road. Because he actually lived in my hometown, not where the road is, weirdly, but he lived there for 6 months when he was in F3. So yeah, that's my little pilgrimage to where he used to live. Just
right. So it's called Senna Road, is it?
And it's actually called Ayrton Senna Road.
So they dropped the De Silva bit.
Yes, I think. They only had so much space on the sign. I think.
I think
cutbacks.
When the boys at Van Diemen told him that De Silva was like Smith, he decided that he was going to change his name. He didn't want to be known as Ayrton Smith.
No, brilliant. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I don't want to keep people for too long, but just something.
If you're happy to overrun, that's not a problem.
No, I'm fine. I just don't want to keep everyone up too much. But we're going to come back to the transatlantic Richard Branson kind of thing. Just one thing I just want to hop forward to while we're still talking about wheels and tarmac. Obviously, you were with Virgin. And we'll come to that. But then you told me that you were headhunted by the Q8 Petroleum Company, who, for those of us of an age, we know that from me personally. It's I think it was Martin Donnelly, I think it was, and Johnny Herbert in F3000, and then latterly Gwyndaf Evans and Pentti Ricola in the rally thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know this about you. So when you send these little bits of info across, you had my attention completely. How did all that come to be that you were involved with like Q8 and the motorsport side of things?
I'd been at Virgin. I'd gone to Virgin when Toleman sold the F1 team to Benetton. Okay. I was surplus to requirements because they didn't need a marketing person. They already had a marketing department, whatever. So I went back. I stayed in the Toleman sort of family, so to speak, and moved across to the project that Ted Toleman was doing, which was to build a powerboat to race across the North Atlantic. All right. So they were looking for a sponsor, and keep it short. Two of their directors, a guy called Simon Draper, who was Richard's partner, all right, who set up Virgin with Richard and another guy. And a guy called Rod Vickery, who was their commercial director. They were motorsport nuts. So I used to take Rod and Simon to the Grand Prix and give them the passes and whatever and stuff like that. So what I did, when I said that we were building a boat to go across the Atlantic, Simon turned around and said, "Great idea for our airline. I'll introduce you to Richard." And that's what happened. The four of us got together and Richard said, "Fine, I'd love to be on it. I'd love to be on the boat and whatever." So that's how that started. And I did the first one, the boat sank. Then I joined Virgin full time to do the second one, okay, which succeeded. Then I stayed on to do the balloon, the first hot air balloon across the North Atlantic, which
I do remember that vaguely. I was very difficult.
Yeah, it nearly ended in tragedy, but anyway.
Still the long one, wasn't it? The big, yeah.
Yeah, that was the one that bounced off Northern Ireland and whatever, and then had that dramatic rescue in the sort of Irish Sea. And then after that, I was approached by an agency that was actually initially they were looking for Virgin business, and I was chatting to them, and they said, "Look, we look after Q8 Petroleum, and they're one of our accounts. and they've just done a deal with Eddie Jordan to do Formula 3000. And I laughed. And they said, "Why do you laugh?" And I said, "Oh, that will be fun with Eddie," because I know Eddie well. And they said, would I consider coming on board to actually run that account to make sure that Q8's interests were sort of looked after, and also because I knew Eddie, I knew sort of the way Eddie would work all right with it. So that's how I got involved with Eddie's Formula 3000 team, which was initially it was Johnny Herbert and Thomas Danielson, and then Eddie fired Thomas Danielson or whatever, another story, okay, and then brought in Martin Donnelly. And then we were all at Brands when Johnny had that horrendous crash, and I left with Eddie. We went to Sidcup Hospital, so I never saw the restart, which Donnelly won. Okay,
yes,
because we were at the Sidcup Hospital, and I do remember because Eddie had already sold Johnny's contract to Peter Collins at Benetton. And there was Johnny. Yeah, there was Johnny in the emergency operating theatre, sort of them desperately trying to keep his feet on. Okay, because they were looking at taking his feet off or whatever. And Eddie's on the phone to Peter Collins. I'm with him in the car park, and Eddie's going, "No, Peter, he'll be all right. He'll be all right. It's just a scratch." Well, no, that's my. And I'm thinking, God, the guy's, the guy might be crippled or whatever, And
then Eddie, lose his foot.
Don't worry, the contract's still alive. The contract's still alive. Whatever. And Johnny made a phenomenal recovery, and how he drove that car in
Rio, wasn't it?
Fourth place. I mean, it is such a heroic drive or whatever. So, I mean, I still see Johnny, and I'm very fond of Johnny.
That's up there with Nicky Lauda in my book of references in terms of a comeback from what could have been.
Absolutely. I mean, they rave about
really up there, isn't it?
They talk about Lauda and the fourth place at Monza, but I mean, yeah, what Johnny did to bring that car home, bearing in mind what he'd gone through and stuff like that. And then the irony of ironies is that poor old Martin Donnelly years later has another horrendous crash, but that's another story.
I had Martin on here actually back in March or April. I bumped into him at the Autosport show and asked if he would be happy to come on, and I said, look, we would have to talk about the accident. If you're happy to, I guess you don't like being reminded of it. And someone actually said something. It was the anniversary of the accident, and I put something out there, and he said, "Oh, poor John, having to be reminded of this by people like you," type thing. And I said, well, actually, I had permission from Johnny, and he said that he sees it. He sees the anniversary of his accident every year since. He says he sees it as another birthday. It's like he was given a second chance. He said he actually looks forward to the date because it said it gives him a chance to have a celebrate, to have a drink and say, look, I'm still here. But I mean, it was phenomenal, those two comebacks. And obviously Martin, unfortunately, didn't make the comeback that we all wanted him to, but he still has done very, very well, and with Lotus and with touring cars and whatever. But going back to John, I mean, obviously you were there, but just an incredible recovery after the accident, and that drive in Rio was unreal, wasn't it? And overshadowed by Nigel Mansell winning for Ferrari, but yeah, it was fantastic, wasn't it? It was brilliant to see.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, I was doing Formula 3000 again the following year without Eddie because we decided that it wasn't going to work with the Kuwaitis, so I stuck with the Kuwaitis and took them to another team.
Yeah. And he got Eddie, Camel on, didn't he, full time? And
yeah, I mean that's another story. But I mean, he Eddie wanted to run the Mugen engine and not the Ford Cosworth.
Oh, okay.
But he told Kuwait Petroleum that in fact his team was the junior F1 team, the junior Benetton team, who had the works Fords, and I sort of had to explain to the Kuwaitis that in fact the Ford engines in Formula 3000 had nothing to do with the Ford Motor Company at all, or whatever. It was, I mean, Eddie was quite happy. I mean, he went with Mugen and Camel and whatever. And eventually the Q8, we went the rally route, okay, until the Gulf War came along, which basically finished that program and whatever. But by then I'd got the Kuwaitis into rallying with Ford. So they got their official link with Ford, which is what they wanted, And the Gulf War finished that one off, and
Which is a shame. And I think the Gulf War also put paid to our viewer Kike as well. I remember I've been in contact with Kike recently, and he said Gulf. He said trying to be an Argentinian racing in the UK in the early '80s wasn't easy.
No. Well, that was that's the Falklands War, and then this was the Gulf. But any conflict.
Oh, sorry, the Falklands was early, and then the Gulf was the '90s.
No, this was Saddam Hussein and all that lot and whatever and stuff like that.
Confusing.
No. So but I mean, I'm Eddie. I've known Eddie a long time. I was involved with another Derek McMahon Racing when we had Stefan Johansson, who's a very, very good friend of mine. Stefan, Bernard Devaney, and Eddie.
Great.
So I've known the Irish boys for a long time.
Yeah, anyway, good people. Just a quick word on Stefan. We had him on for a chat as well. He's great. He's one of those guys who people might see as, he didn't win a F1 race or anything like that. But the more you dig into his career, it was remarkable, wasn't it? So much stuff happened to him with Onyx and hitting the deer in Austria, and the car being flown in overnight. He said there was a great one. He said he was on the back of a moped after he hit the deer in Australia. He was on the back of a moped, and basically he was driving past some other vehicle, and it basically just slapped him off the moped and hit him in the face. Someone went past and elbowed him or something. Just amazing stories. Stefan,
he's a good guy. Again, known him since he started. Well, since he broke into F3, which is I don't know, 70 when whatever. But and he came and slept on the floor in the famous Buller Road house, which was Ian Phillips's house. We used to take a lot of waste and strays in there. But Stefan, I talk to Stefan a lot, see him a lot, and he's doing well with his art.
Yes, in LA, very nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's going to spend more time over in London next year. He's opened up a studio over here.
Okay.
But I think Stefan was one of those guys that everyone in racing loved it. He'd drive anything. He'd drive the wheels off anything. He told me once, the reason he loved racing in America was that you'd go to places like Road America or Elkhart Lake or whatever.
Yeah. And
he said, although they were incredibly dangerous, these tracks gave you so much satisfaction. He said, honestly, he said, I don't think it's a death wish that these guys have, but it's that feeling that if I can actually drive these tracks absolutely at 10/10s, it gives them that adrenaline rush. Okay. Yeah. And I think, F1, apart from maybe Spa or something, most F1 tracks are very sanitized and whatever. Yes. And I mean, it's a bit going back to sims and things. The kids can be quick on a sim or whatever, but if you crash a sim, you don't hurt yourself. And you just go out there and just drive again at sort of 10 times or whatever. Anyway.
Whereas if you have a crash at the Kink at Road America, you're in a bit of bother.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just like Stefan's looking after. He looks after Scott Dixon and Felix Rosenquist, isn't he? And all these guys.
Yeah, and he's got this Louis Foster, who he's just taken on in Indy Next, there's another. I think there's another Scandinavian guy that he's got in one of the teams as well.
Is it Linus? Is it Linus Lindqvist? Has he got him?
It might be actually. It could be. I mean, Scott looks after himself. I mean, he's unreal.
Unreal.
I mean, Scott is part of the Chip Ganassi furniture and will remain so. But whereas obviously he's moving Felix around and whatever, so he's more active with these guys, placing these guys in teams to keep them going, whatever.
Well, I've never actually met Stefan, so if he's going to be over here next year, I'm going to tap him up.
By all means, I'll let him know. He's a very affable chap.
Yeah. I do have contact with him, but I'm sure we'll sort it out. That'd be great. But just quickly on the rally side now, you brought the Mobil Oils Europe sponsorship into rallying, and correct if I'm wrong, this is a time where they were running like Mickey Biaz and Francois Delacour and people like that.
Yeah,
which is my kind of era. I love all that. The early 90s rallying was absolutely fantastic. That must have been a cool environment to be involved.
Absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we were developing the Escort Cosworth, but through running the Sierra Sapphire with the 4-wheel drive sort of systems and whatever. So by the time we got to when Mobil came on board, and I managed to get that deal sorted because I've done many things, including acquiring sponsors and stuff. Part of the Mobile deal was that they said we need to have a rock star. Well, my words, but we need to have a top driver. And Mickey Biazion was perfect because he'd been double world champion at Lancia and whatever, and he was managed by a friend of mine called Mike Greasley, who looked after Kankkunen as well. So it was quite easy to do the negotiation. So Mickey came in on a big salary. Delacour was peanuts because he was unproven, and we went at it with the Escort Cosy, and won Monte Carlo, won loads of events. Didn't win the world championship as such, but that's for reasons that sort of I think we should have done. But anyway, but just going around, I mean, those days rallying was like it's been with this recent event. We'd race over 3 or 4 days, massive, loads of stages. We'd have service mid-stage in Greece. The helicopter with 4 mechanics and an engineer land mid-stage, changing time. It was just an army, wow. It was just brilliant. Whereas now it's the cloverleaf format. You go out and come back to the base all the time, and they just sit there. They just sit there. I mean, I said to Malcolm Wilson, I must come on an event, and then I said, well, I don't know whether I just want to sit in one place. It was magical, and I enjoyed it so much. I'm so glad I did 3 or 4 years of world champ, maybe 4 or 5 years of world championship rallying. Argentina, New Zealand, Greece, all these events. The only one I never did was East African Safari because it wasn't on the calendar when I was doing it.
Oh yes, cool. Because they're in Kenya now, isn't it? It goes to Kenya.
The Kenya. Never did that, but did Australia and New Zealand and travelled all over the world to great places and stuff like that. Which was so refreshing after F1, which was always the same flight to the same hotel to the same track, eat, drink, sleep, repeat type thing. Whereas rallying was a bit more expansive in that respect.
A bit more like a wider view of where you
until you've done it for 5 years, and then you keep saying, "Hang on, I'm going back to you go back to Corsica," and you go, "I don't need a road map now. I know these roads like the back of my hand."
Like I've done this, pretty. I mean, in terms of things to get tired of, that's pretty good. That's a good thing to be tired of, going and doing that for 5 years. Terrific era as well. Absolutely fantastic. Because obviously that was also the year where the Subarus were up and coming with Colin and Richard Burns.
And Carlos Sainz. Carlos was a super guy, nice guy, real nice guy. And
he's still winning road, isn't he? Still doing well in car and stuff.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm still good mates with Malcolm. I mean, those guys, Didi, Oriel, Kankkunen, all that lot. Trying to think back, some of the Armin Schwartz with the Toyotas. Again, it was motorsport, very edgy, so different to Formula One. But that's with such a breath of fresh air. That's why I like doing it. That's why I like to look back and think, God, I've done pretty much everything. That gives me a lot of satisfaction.
Yeah, I'm sure. Fantastic, absolutely brilliant. Just very quickly, we've got to talk about powerboats because people probably won't have any idea about powerboats apart from Didier Pironi, and unfortunately, that's how we lost him. But you raced them. You were a team owner. You were world champions, and you got praise from Roger Penske for it. I mean, that's very cool stuff.
Well, it is, and funny enough, it means a lot to me because I have a great friend called Steve Curtis, who is probably the most successful offshore powerboat racing of all time. I mean, he's won, I don't know, over a dozen world championships, and is just a brilliant guy, nice guy. And I first met him when I was at Toleman, and we bought his father's company called Cougar Marine. So I think Steve was about 15 when I met him. All right, we've sort of grown up together, and we put a series together in the early noughties, which was, we called it Pro V, but it was basically Formula 2 on water. I tried very hard to make that work, but dealing with people in powerboat racing is very different to motor racing because the powerboat guys, they tend to race when they want to, and they don't really sort of want to race in a championship as such, so trying to pull people together, and it was difficult and it was expensive. All right. So after about 6 years of promoting a series pretty much on my own and costing me again another slug of money or whatever, I decided to sort of become, what are they called? Poacher becomes gamekeeper, or the other way around. So I joined a series called Powerboat P1, which is basically sort of proper race boats against sort of more cruising type sort of boats. It was 2 classes or whatever, and I thought, right, I'm going to be a team owner. I'm going to go in and sort of put a team together, which I did. But what I was able to do was there's a company in the States, Ilmor, who make all the Chevrolet engines for Indy, okay, and do a lot of work with General Motors and whatever. The company was set up by Mario Ilian, and they're all sort of ex-Cosworth guys who sort of and Peter Morgan, the late Peter Morgan. And they did a lot of indie work and stuff like that. And they, about 20 years ago or whatever now, they wanted to go into the marine industry, and they got the Dodge Viper, the V10 engine, and they said, right, we're going to use this as a pleasure boat engine. And I said, no, you should go racing with it. And Paul Ray, who was again a great friend of mine, who's the CEO, English guy, he said, Chris, he said, when we go motor racing, he said, if we go Formula One, okay, we build an engine for Mercedes and they pay for it. He said, when we go in Indy, and at the time they were building Honda engines, all right, he said, we get Honda to pay for it. He said, if we go powerboat racing, who's going to pay for it? So I sort of said, oh, anyway, I pestered him, and we had loads of lunches for about 18 months. And then eventually he said, all right, he said, I'll support you. We'll support you with works engines and work support. But you've got to win the championship, because we've got to beat Mercury. Mercury just were 98% of the market. Okay, whatever. So I said, okay, support me. I'll make sure that we have a team that wins the championship. And that's basically what we did. I mean, I went for the best boat, best team of people. We were in a class called Evolution class, but I called the Team Ego, because unfortunately I just had to bring the best people in. And when you bring the best people in, you have a clash of egos, okay?
Sure.
But I had to live with that in order to develop, in order to deliver, okay?
Cool.
And when we won the championship at the last race in Portugal, in Portimao, okay, Paul Ray was there, and Paul was on the phone talking to someone and whatever, and then he finished the call. He was sort of putting his hand over and looking at me and nodding, and I said, "Oh, who was that?" He said, "Oh, that was Roger Penske. He sends his congratulations, well done for winning the championship." And I remember that Roger had actually, back in his younger days, had actually raced offshore himself in the States, and that meant more to me, because I thought, I've done something here for a Penske company and won, okay, and that meant a lot. And I sort of quit whilst I was ahead. And Paul and I have remained good mates ever since. And I think one of their ex-engineers said to me the other day, didn't he said something like, "Got to remember, you won the national championship in so and so, and I in such a year." And I went, "Oh, blimey, so I did." And that must have been Ilmor's first ever offshore championship, whatever. But it was great fun. But powerboats, I mean, I did Key West in my 50s, and the thing about a powerboat, which is really spooky, is that you're barreling down these long straights, well over a ton. Because I wasn't racing catamarans, because they are like 120, 140, 150, because they fly. But a monohull is sort of still on the top of the water, and you're flat out, and you're steering, and the guy next to you is on the throttles. And I always used to say to people, it's like driving a rally car, and the navigator's working the pedals, and the driver's just steering it. And you're constantly talking to your throttle man, and he's saying, and you've got the compass heading or whatever, and he's saying, right, okay, you got the boy, and you're going, yeah, and you got, right, I'm on such and such heading. He said, right, you're absolutely flat out on the throttles. He's saying, okay, we're going to a 90 right or whatever. Okay, get ready. I'm easing the throttles back like that, and you sort of turn as the power comes off like that. But you're trusting him all the time. And then you're getting into the turn, and the thing's starting to skip. And this is like a 45, 50 foot boat or whatever. and then he puts the power back on, and the last thing you want is oversteer. The last thing, because you just go,
It's gonna-
all right. And you just think, okay, I've got it. Okay, it's biting a little bit, and you just got the flaps and whatever. And that was spooky. I have to say that was something that I've done. I mean, I've done two-man bobsleigh and I've done Cresta run and things like that. But because I'm mad, but I haven't jumped out of a plane. That's one thing I won't do. My son has, whatever. And
I quite fancy a bit of bobsleigh now you've mentioned that. Hey, get in.
Oh yeah, I did that with the late Tony Dron and Rupert Keegan and a guy called Richard Piper. We went to San Moritz one winter and just basically played doing bobsleigh, two-man bobsleigh and Cresta and stuff. We used to do mad things in our 20s and stuff.
Fantastic. I did see a comment actually about 10 minutes ago from a guy, Jim McKendrick. It says, "Is there anything you haven't done?" Amazing. It turns out that jumping out of a plane is the only thing you haven't done, I think.
Yeah. My son did it on his gap year. All right, before he went to university, he did it in Australia and went out at 12,000 feet. And I just said to my wife, I said, "There's no way you'd get me. I've done a lot of things, but you'd never get me to jump out of a plane." You know,
It's a firm veto.
Yeah.
I just want to come back to actually. This is about Stefan Johansson very quickly. John Cavill, our friend John, he said in 1992 went to the Indy 500 for the first time with John Glover and Simon Arkless, both of champion spark plugs,
champion blokes.
And he said on a Friday they were stood on the inside of turn 1 along with Stefan, who was looking for a IndyCar drive. Now, firstly, 1992. Not the Indy 500 to go to for the first time. Absolute carnage. I mean, last year I had Paul Page on, Alonso Jr., who won it, Roberto Guerrero, the pole sitter, Lynn St. James. They all came on in the build-up to my trip to the Indy 500. And it was just absolute carnage. So that's not the first one you want to go to. But apparently Stefan was looking, for a drive in IndyCar. And John has just said that when the cars came past, his comment was bleep hell. As if to say, what am I doing?
He said to me, he said, as you know, I've never been. He said the most frightening corner is turn 1 because he said it narrows.
Every single person that I've ever spoken to that has raced at the Indy 500, even Mario, Danny Sullivan, Larry Lyondike, these guys that have won the thing, Bill Power, they've always said turn 1 is terrifying. He said, how can 4 corners look the same and be so different?
I know. Yeah. That was it. Yeah. I mean, I've talked to Stefan about in his Indy experiences and stuff, but that's another story. You can talk to him about that another time.
I mean, but also even as a spectator, we sat on the outside of turn 4. Just when they do the road course, just before what the right turn would be on the first corner of the road course. We were just up a bit further around the corner from that, and we were looking down the main straight. And you see them going down the main straight, and then they turn left, and it looks like a hairpin from the angle that we were at, looking down the straight. It doesn't look like a nice sweeping 90-degree right-hander, which it appears to be on telly. It's a proper tight turn, and they're doing it at over 200 miles an hour. It's absolutely astonishing. You think? Well,
I mean, the downforce.
Lift.
It's all about downforce. I think, funny enough, watching Abu Dhabi at the weekend, and I think Martin Brundle made some comment, or someone made some comment that the current Formula One car weighs a ton or something close to a ton, but they generate 5 tons of downforce. And you think about it, and you think, once you're in a car and you know that it's going to stick, okay, you have so much confidence. I mean, we look at them. I mean, I saw the F1 cars a couple of years ago at the Grand Prix, and I was there with Kenneth Atchison, and he said, we just looked at each other, and I said, the speeds in the corners now. I mean, they're massive cars, okay, but they're massive because they have a huge, great footprint of downforce sucking them down. But they just so fast in the corners, compared with our day when they were all, when you've got. I mean, I do sort of like it when you've got more power than grip. Which slide. The Ronnie Petersons of this world. I mean, I was brought up on oversteer, whatever.
Yeah.
But the world's moved on. I mean, even the engineers, guys like Pat Simmons and Adrian Newey, those guys, they were designing cars that had a minimal amount of downforce, but they've just progressed over the last 30 years or 40 years in some cases, just with technology and stuff. But anyway.
But that speed, just to touch on, we're going to wind down shortly, but I mean, just touch on the speed through the corners. Again, it's something that you don't get from watching on TV.
No.
I finally went, I mean, I've been to a few qualifying sessions when I was in the 80s and stuff when I was young, but I finally went to a Grand Prix 2021. It was when Lewis and Max had their issue at Cops, which I'm not going to get into because people just talk a lot of rubbish about it. But
do you want my opinion?
Lewis, go for it. Go for Lewis, it. I'm going to see if we agree.
Lewis did a bit of an Ayrton. He went for a gap that closed. End of story. Okay.
Yes. And what I will say is he did get out of it, just not quickly enough. Because you can see at one point he's almost alongside and then he gets out of it and that's where the contact is. But
yeah.
Just devil's advocate. What I will say, why was it that when Lewis was on the outside this year and he turned in on George Russell, he was to blame, but yeah. And there's been other instances where the person on the outside has always been to blame for turning in, but on that one, it wasn't. Anyway, it's all done and dusted. But we were there, but for we were at Stowe for the race. But we were at the sprint race. We were in the grandstand on the Hamilton Straight, the main straight. And when you see them sling it into that first turn, which isn't that fast a corner, it's an incredible thing to see. The speed they carry, as you say, the speed they carry into it, and the car is absolutely pinned. And that's my one sort of takeaway from that weekend was just seeing them going down the straight and then slinging it into the right hander. Absolutely.
But you know, we go back to the Indy thing. I mean, when I went to my first, super speedway thing in Fontana, over in California, you watch them. I remember I was on the roof with the spotters. I was taken up there, and you watch them going around the curves, and you think, oh, they don't look that quick. And then once they get sort of parallel, and then you see them coming onto the straight, and the speed they go down the straight, you just went, wow, because they're doing like 220, 240 or whatever.
Again, it's the similar thing with the Indy 500. As I said, we were on the outside of turn 4, and I've got video of me sort of doing that with my phone and my camera, trying to get some footage of it. And then I thought, I'm just going to hold the camera up straight, and you can't make out the car going past. It's just the speed is phenomenal.
Anyway.
And yeah, I think we all like a bit of speed. It's why we're all fascinated by drag racing and stuff, isn't it? It's just ridiculous, crazy stuff. Right. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about. We still can, but I'm just going to sort of got a few little fun questions that I've just put together at the end here. You sent me a great photo of you and I don't know if you were handing a $5 to Tom Wheatcroft.
Oh, yes.
Or
with Eddie Cheever in it.
And the caption was you were trying to buy an F2 drive, but you actually lost a bet, didn't you? Do you remember what the bet was? That was the first thing that came into my mind.
I can't. I mean, Gunnar, who was a great friend of me and Ian Phillips. I don't know what it was. I mean, one of those funny things that sort of you're all on the podium or whatever. I honestly can't remember. It might have been something to do with Gunnar, probably. I know Eddie, I don't think Eddie had anything to do with it. He was. I think in that picture, Eddie's about 12. Well, he arrived on the scene as a 17-year-old. So anyway, but
yeah.
No, I don't know. I don't know what it was.
Fair enough.
Something that
not sure why.
It was funny.
Not sure why my brain went there, but I just
no.
But I actually had Eddie on at the start of last year. He's a cool guy, very direct, isn't he, Eddie? But yeah, he's a good guy, Eddie Cheever.
Oh yes, no, I saw him at the Tyrrell book launch earlier this year or whatever, and we hadn't seen him for a while. So no, he's a good lad. He's a good lad.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He sent me a lovely signed photo of his '98 IndyCar winning thing.
Oh right, okay, fine.
I didn't realise that he was paid in. I guess. Do you know the story about when he won the Indy 500 as a driver owner? I don't know if anyone knows this. Very, very quickly. Basically, he was sponsored by Rachel's Potato Chips. And they said, yeah, we'll sponsor you, but we can only pay you in crisps. Basically. And he goes, well, okay, but... So what he did, he sold loads of the crisps to AJ Foyt's hospitality crew thing. And that gave him enough money to get a second engine in case he needed it. And he went off and won the race. There you go. Paid in crisps. You don't get that these days. Right, no, that's fair enough. I digressed a bit. Oh yeah, now you're a journalist. Now, do you? I'm not a journalist. I'm just a fan that writes about motorsport. But I don't like this sort of sensationalist clickbait sort of style of journalism that's come in. It's, things like, like Lewis Hamilton reveals shocking secret about Mercedes, and it turns out they ran out of Fanta or something in the hospitality. And you think, well, I'm just wondering what your thoughts on how journalism has changed a bit, because obviously, as you said, you guys were the only outlet back with Autosport, and it was my Bible when I was a kid. But obviously, there's so many outlets now, and there's so much competition. People just seem to talk a lot of rubbish in headlines, basically.
Well, I mean, as I touched upon earlier, I mean, the world's different when I was talking about the football and being able to go to training grounds and things like that. The problem now is that we can't stop it, because social media, Twitter, X, whatever you call it, Facebook, whatever, it allows anyone to have a voice, and there are plenty of people,
idiots like me.
Well, no, but and I look at it, and I look at things. But what I've done is I've sort of said, right, okay, there are a lot of people out there that don't fully understand racing. So maybe what we should be doing is trying to educate them more, okay, and get them to sort of understand it. But there's no point fighting it, okay, because what we went through a different era, and the comments were controlled because Autosport / Motoring News was the only mouthpiece then, all right, and everyone had to wait until the word was written. And the only person, if we wrote something that was wrong or right or whatever, they could come to us, and we would actually take the flack or take the plaudits or whatever. Okay.
Yes.
I think the problem now is that certainly when I remember an instance, we were at Monza and Senna. Oh, I think it was the incident when Senna was suspended, all right, for signing for Lotus without permission. And sorry, yeah, and some journalists were coming up to me saying, and what about it and this, and what about it and that? And I said, well, he's over there, go and talk to him. Now today, okay, he would be escorted by at least 2 media people with the phone, sort of basically, recording every word, okay, to make sure that he probably wasn't misquoted or whatever and stuff like that. And I think that everything is much more politically correct in that respect, whereas we were much more a bit more carefree in that respect. And
that wasn't the comeback from so many different angles, I guess.
Yeah, and also I think that there were misquotes and things like that, but there was never anything that was sort of like really bad from my point of view. I mean, everyone knew each other. I think the problem now is that there are a lot of journalists that don't go to races. Okay,
almost faceless when it comes to the
So they'll just pick up. You can pick up, and I could sit and write a load of codswallop about the last Grand Prix and stuff. I mean, I agree with you. I saw something today talking about Lewis, and I thought, oh blimey, and it wasn't quite the Fanta thing, but it was something that like, oh, this is why bother? But they're all
really.
Well, they're all fighting with column inches, aren't they? It's always like, follow me, talk to me, look at me, blah, 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 blah. So I tend to sort of look at all of them. I mean, I've got an idea who are what I call the ones to trust, the ones who know what they're talking about, okay? But they're relatively few. I mean, they're relatively few. There's probably about, 20 guys that you could sort of say, yeah, he understands the sport. He knows what he's talking about. And there's probably about 2,000 that haven't a bloody clue, to be honest. It's the way it is, there's no point getting there are guys on Facebook, on my Facebook followers and whatever, that get really upset about things. And I'm just going, just chill, guys, just chill. It is what it is,
I'm the same. There was someone that was it. It was on Facebook earlier on. I saw it on social media, and it was Monster Energy have moved from Mercedes to McLaren.
Right.
Lewis is going to keep his personal sponsorship with Monster Energy, and they said, are you surprised by this? And there were people saying, oh, I can't believe this has happened and that and blah blah. And I was just, and I hate to say it, I was sitting there thinking, who cares? It's not up to me. It doesn't affect my enjoyment of the sport. It doesn't affect the racing. It's just another sponsorship deal that's been done. And I think, and there's people getting really angry about it.
Well, I mean, it used to happen. I mean,
Which is fair enough, but you
we
think,
used to
well,
get sponsors. I used to lose sponsors to other teams. I mean, McLaren would nick most of our sponsors. And I remember with dear old Jackie Oliver. I mean, Jackie and I are still sort of, we still speak to each other and whatever. There were times when, what sponsors would do was they'd call you in. Arrows would go in. Then the next day, Toleman were in, and then the next day, Willie, and everyone was trying to get the cheapest deal. The sponsors were trying to get the cheapest deal. So we were all basically screwing each other around. I mean, Bernie once said to me, will you and Jackie stop arguing over this bloody sponsor, which I think was DeLonghi or someone like that or whatever. So, and I said, well, that's the way, that's the way it was. It was dog eat dog, the Piranha Club, as it was once called. But I mean, I read a bit more into the Monster Energy thing, and they believe, and they've got the stats, they believe that McLaren appeals to a much younger market, than Mercedes do. And they regard that, I think they call it Gen X market, and that's 18 to 24. And they say that age group follows Norris and Piastri closer than it does Russell and Hamilton. Okay. Yeah. So they've moved for legitimate marketing reasons or whatever.
Yeah. And also, I think, Coca-Cola are already on board with McLaren, and they own Monster, I think. But
yeah, no, they do. Well, they do. They do. They do from that point of view. Yeah. So whatever. But
you said that about the demographic and everything. I had Chip Ganassi on here a few weeks ago, and he said that McLaren. Well, he didn't say McLaren, but we knew who we were talking about. He said some teams run their team through social media to a certain audience. We don't do that. It was a whole Alex Palou thing, and obviously it was about McLaren, and they are targeting that. That's the way they're going to run things, and which is fair enough. But it doesn't affect who I follow in F1. It doesn't affect who I like, who I want. It's just a deal. But there was some real anger flying around about it. I thought, it's a drink. Can we all just sit down and chill?
And if you don't like it, don't buy the product.
Well, exactly. I've had one energy drink in my life, didn't like it.
Yeah. Well,
if they want to come on and sponsor the page, I would,
Unfortunately, Red Bull gave me diabetes or diabetes too. But
oh crikey,
that was 20 years ago or whatever. No, I just drank too much Red Bull instead of coffee. As you get older, your system can't sort of deal with the potency of the Red Bull drink. Whatever.
Yes, crikey. No, that's right. Yeah, that's no, good. Good to get your thoughts on the journalistic side these days, because
well, there's journalists and there's just clickbait, as you said, sort of commentators and whatever and stuff. So
I'll try and stick to the former. It's not always easy.
I'm not going to mention certain journalists because it might inflate their egos even more than what they have at the moment. But there are guys I respect, and there are a few that I think put it this way. Sometimes I'm beginning to think now that journalists and presenters, or certainly people that appear in front of the camera, are more concerned about their self-importance or their persona rather than the racing driver, if you know what I mean, than the actual participants, And I'm a little bit like, I tend to turn a Grand Prix on when they're on the warming up lap, and then I turn it off once the results have come up or once they've finished, if you know what I mean. I don't, the precursor and everything doesn't really interest me. I mean, occasionally I'll sit and watch it. But normally I'll watch a Grand Prix from the drop of the flag, from the green lights until the flag,
It's all about the racing. We like that. Yeah, that's what I like to do. I try and avoid all the other guff. It's just good to have the racing.
It's for another audience anyway. It's for another audience.
Yeah. But you can take from it whatever you want to take from it. I mean, people getting bent out of shape about the whole show around the Vegas thing and saying it was a bit cringy, but it's like, don't watch it then.
No. I said earlier, they were, we did Vegas 40 years ago. It was razzmatazz during the day. I mean, okay, these things pop up, these greats or whatever pop up in different tracks and whatever. Okay, I mean, it happens. it happens. I mean, once that was sorted, I mean, I had a friend out there who had actually taken his granddaughter along and paid quite a lot of money for the seats. It is what it is. I mean, it's there we are. There we are.
It's changed. It's all marketing. Right, just a final couple of things. I had a week ago. Tommy Byrne came on. We all know about Tommy, and Eddie Jordan said he was the greatest racing driver he's ever seen. And a real what could have been story. Is there anyone that you worked with in terms of a driver in F2 or the lower series that could have really kicked on and become one of the very best? I mean, obviously you worked with Ayrton, who went on and did it. He did it all. Was there something that you think it didn't quite work out for that person, and based on talent, it really could have done?
The could have, would have, shouldn't, or no, the could have, would have, or whatever. Okay, blimey, that's a difficult one because it brings into play friends, and you can.
Yes,
difficult. Well, I think anyone who's made it to Grand Prix has sort of achieved what they wanted to do. Guys in F2 that never, and I'm not talking about since F2 became Dallara-ized, any of these one make mega chrome engine type deals, because Formula 2 and Formula 3 is very, very different to my era, and I preferred my era. Okay, but let me think. Oh God, that really is a difficult one. I mean, you need, if you sort of threw names at me and sort of said, did I think so and so was overrated, or did I? I mean, what I will say is that there are a lot of guys who can go out there and drive a race car quickly for a couple of laps. Okay, but there's so much more that goes into it, like race runs, managing tires, managing the cars, even back in the old days. I mean, I think it's probably harder in the old days because you couldn't talk to the team. You literally went out there with your tires and everything, and that was it. You had to make do with what you had, your fuel load and everything. Is that better than it is now, where, I mean, they did talk a couple of years ago of cutting down communication, but they still seem to talk to each other quite a lot.
Yeah, still code words and whatnot.
Yeah. So difficult. I mean,
I haven't seen one comment from Carl Jones that's come in.
Evening, Carl. All right.
Evening, Jonesy.
Yeah.
He has said Tony Trimmer. That's a good.
The problem. I mean, it's difficult because Tony. I mean, I know Tony, and I mean, when Brendan McInerney backed him when Race Cars International, and funnily enough, I'm seeing Brendan in a couple of weeks. He's coming over to the UK. I mean, he drove in F3 the Brabham BT28. I mean, he was exemplary. I mean, he was a good driver. He had sort of F1 opportunities, but then the problem with Lotus was who he drove for. I mean, there are a lot of guys like Jim Crawford, Brian Henton, Bob Evans, all these guys. They all had opportunities, okay? But the problem was that most of these cars were like start line specials. I mean, Lotus were notorious. John Webb would probably be paying Colin Chapman a slug of money just to get an extra car to put his local hero in. And then, Colin Chapman or the Lotus would sort of say, that one's got a dodgy metering unit. That engine will pack up after about 8 laps or 5 laps or whatever, but we've got the money. I mean, it used to happen, whatever. So a lot of these guys were getting raw deals in a way, but, when you're offered the opportunity to drive an F1 car, you don't turn it down,
which is exactly what Tommy said last week. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, whether Tony, it's so difficult really, because there's only so many seats, I mean, the prime seats. Where would he have fitted in, at that time? Again, that you have to go back, and even now you look at it and you go, right, there's 10 teams, 20 seats, but there's not necessarily, those 20 guys aren't necessarily the best 20 guys in the world. Okay. And but that's always been the case. We've never had Grand Prix racing with the creme de la creme. There's always someone that sort of missed out. Whatever. I don't know. It's the cream usually rises to the top. As they say. Verstappen. Exemplary. He came in as a 17-year-old, and immediately after they close all the doors, don't they? Right? Okay, you've got to be of a certain age. You've got to have so many points to get your license. Verstappen came in, did F3 straight to F1 and blitzed it. Senna F3 to F1 and blitzed it. Why can't we have that? It'd be great to see these. There's where you see talent. Guys. Verstappen wasn't overawed by an F1 car, or not. What I saw, Senna wasn't. Prost went from F3. He did 2 F2 races as a guest at Poe or whatever, but he went straight into F1 and whatever and stuff. They're the guys really that have the talent really from that point of view.
There's so many barriers put up now, isn't there? It's a shame.
Well, there is, and for whatever reason. There's usually political / monetary reasons why F3 and F2 is controlled in the way that it is. It's difficult to judge F2 apart from, I think the only way you can really judge the talent now is if a driver comes into F2 via F3 and does a Russell / Piastri / Leclerc, where you go, bang, bang, bang. You just got to keep the momentum. The moment you finish a season, if you go into F2 from F3, you got to win it straight away. Or else these situations where they end up as test drivers. I feel for guys like Drogovic or whatever. On their backside. Who was the guy that just did nothing? Won the championship? Was it Pianta or someone? Giorgio? Wasn't there? No, was that? That was the guy with that incredible voice that drove me mad because he just talked so quickly in English, but he was Italian.
Oh, David Valsecchi, was it him?
Yeah, Valsecchi. Yeah, wins the championship and then immediately is frozen out. Sorry guys, you got to drive LMP2 now because that's the only class that you can drive. Whatever.
Yeah.
I spent a couple of years in karting when the Norrises and the Islets and the Tictums and the Russells and all that lot were sort of coming through, and Sainz and Kvyat and whatever.
Callum Islets a good shout. He's very good. I really rate him.
What, Callum?
He's been.
It is a good.
He's been mistreated, I think, recently.
Well, I think I've spoken to the family and I've spoken to various other people, so I'm not going to comment. But I think it was always going to happen. Really, I think maybe he maybe should have sorted it or frustrated or shown his frustrations earlier than so he would have given himself a better chance of moving to another team. But no, anyway, whatever happened, these things happen. Whatever. Anyway, you can't wet nurse all of them.
No, exactly.
I never. A couple of people said to me, "Did I ever want to go into management, driver management?" And I sort of said no. I was always happy at Autosport to help drivers, like Tony Bryce, like Gunnar Nielsen, like all these guys, Stefan, get them good drives because they were friends and you just wanted to see these people succeed. But now I remember talking to a team owner some years ago, and I said he was running like 8 Formula Fords or Formula Renaults in various series in Europe. And I said, how are you able to tell 8 dads that their sons are all going to make it? And he said, well, you have to in order to survive, And I said, I can't do that. I said, if there's one that's going to make it, that's the one I want to support. But, the other 7 are just sort of, making up the budget, That's the reason why I never went into driver management or ran teams, No.
Fair enough. Just a few names that have come in. We've got Richard Hinton. Evening, Richard. He said that Tony Bryce was great in F3. Obviously, when he said it's 48 years tonight since the crash, which that's true.
Tell Richard that I want him to restore that Toleman that he's got. He's got the Toleman TG280-01, which was our F2 prototype car. The only Toleman that Stephen South ever drove in BP colours before he got
Stephen
blue
South,
flag.
there's another tale, isn't there? Yeah, he could have.
Another tale, another might have, would have, could have.
Absolutely. But when that's restored, I want to see it as well.
Well, Richard's got it. It's in Richard's garage. All right, he bought it from Italy, from Alberto Colombo's team or whatever. Anyway,
that's a cool project. I mean, other names that have been so we've had like Paul Warwick. Obviously, we know how good he was, and Stefan Beloff. He could have gone on and done great things. Ian Taylor. There's many that are out there that could.
Yeah, I mean, Beloff. There are a lot of these guys like Beloff who were frighteningly quick, almost like too quick, too many laps on the edge, and it was sort of a bit like a loaded chamber that one day it was going to happen. And I mean, another guy that I really liked and I was really sad when he died was Manfred Winkelhock, another guy who died in a bloody Porsche, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, was that in Canada?
I think that was motorsport or whatever.
Motorsport,
I mean, I really like.
Obviously, that's how Kenny got his drive with March, because it was he took over.
With the Ram set, the Ram set,
the Skull Bandit.
The Skull Bandit. No, I mean, no, there are lots and lots of guys that sort of are no longer with us. Joe Gartner was a lovely guy. Got my first pair of skis from Joe Gartner. Never ever used them. He gave me these beautiful pair of atomic skis, and they stayed in their cellophane or their plastic covers for years and years. Never ever touched snow.
I spoke actually with Brian Redman on here, and he spoke fondly of Joe Gartner. He's a very good driver. Good.
Well, there's another. Actually, he was an underrated driver. I mean, there was Joe, the other guy that sadly, should have gone on to do better things with Helmut Koenig. All right. I mean, his death was horrendous. Okay.
That was awful. Yeah.
But no, he these guys that fell victim to, Armco barriers and stuff and catch fencing and things like that. I mean, I've seen those. I've seen things in front of my own eyes and stuff, but you basically just harden yourself to it, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got one final question that we always ask people, and it's a horrible question, and there's no right answer to it. So I don't know why I ask it, but I do anyway. Obviously, mainly like drivers who have raced against a number of very talented racers. You've obviously worked with many great drivers. Are there any that stand out for whatever reason as being just having something extra? Maybe something like like Ayrton had with his aura, or Nicky, or you were around at an amazing time. And was there any that you think they are truly top draw for whatever reason?
Actually, thinking back now, all right. I mean, Ayrton was exceptional, all right, and obviously I can say that because I've worked with him. Derek was tremendously gritty and determined, almost like Mansell-esque, and I mean, had a lot of determination and stuff to get himself through. A guy who was sensational in F2, and I think could have done a really good job in F1, probably was Bruno Giacomelli. All right, I mean, Bruno. That season 78 when he drove the 782 and just blitzed everyone. I mean, when a driver has confidence in a car and the prep and everything, I mean, Mike Smith, who was his mechanic then, and the boys and the BMW guys, I mean, Bruno was just sensational that year, and it was also good in F3. I think Bruno could have done better, but I don't. It's difficult because there's so many. I can only really. I mean, Stefan. Stefan had the ability to. I mean, the problem with Stefan was that his Ferrari drive for 2 years. He drove for Ferrari at a difficult time. Okay, and he had to overcome the friendship, the Ferrari sort of support of Alboreto. But Stefan won Ferrari mechanics over and stuff, and even to this day he says, I said, you've driven for McLaren and you've driven for Ferrari, what was not so much what's the better one, but what do people in America think of you for? And they always think of me as Ferrari, because Ferrari is such a huge name, and it's a bit like if you go through your entire career and you never win a Grand Prix, okay, but you say you've driven for Ferrari, you've achieved something, okay. So I mean, he's happy in that. I mean, he ended up driving a lot of crap cars, and I said to him, "Why?" And he said, "Because I like driving racing cars. You know, whether it's an AGS or whatever he ended up driving."
It was the footwork he wasn't fond of, was he? He didn't like the footwork.
But he liked driving racing cars. I mean, he was comfortable driving, you know, crap cars as opposed to good cars. You know, I mean, I said to him quite recently, we were talking about various cars, and he was raving about the Toleman 185, the car that he and Watson tested, but it had no tires, and then eventually it became the Benetton Toleman at the end of the year. And he said that was the best car I ever drove. And I said, what, above a McLaren? And he said, yeah, no, absolutely. He said that McLaren I drove with Prost that year, he said, oh, that was actually quite a pig of a car, whatever. And it surprised me, you know, in a way, you know, that certain drivers have, you know, favorites and cars that they like, and you know, whatever. No, I think I mean, going back, oh no, we go on forever if it,
it's a shocking question, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think I'm sort of, you know, I'm quite fortunate in that I can sort of say that I spent a year with Ayrton, and what he did after that wasn't a surprise, okay. And you know, maybe well, I don't want to go into the Williams situation, I mean, but anyway, it doesn't matter. We you know, we got to remember him for three world championships with the McLaren, and controversial though they were, I mean, he was a controversial character. And is he the greatest of all time? No, I would say he was probably of his era, okay.
That's what I always say, of his generation, of his era.
Because you can't compare against Fangio and whatever. They drove different cars and different. I mean, they drove 3-hour races, and you know, Jim Clark. You know, he was a different driver. These guys are all different. I mean, they're brilliant in themselves. I mean, Clark was sensational, but to say Ayrton's better than Jim Clark is wrong. You know, in that. So they're of their era. That's how I look. You know, look at it, you know.
I think that's probably a good way to end on that subject, is because everyone said it comes up on a slow news day. Some publication will put it out on social media. Is so and so the greatest of all time? And my response is always, it's a question that doesn't have an answer. It's impossible. You can't pick the best of all time because there's Fangio and there's Clark and Senna and, you know, Lauda and Villeneuve. They're all from different eras, different challenges, different cars, different dangers, different skill sets. And it's a question that needs to be answered, isn't it?
Well, no, and it applies in all sport. Is, you know, with cricket, you know, I mean, you know, both them. You know, is Ben Stokes better than both them? You know, for example, you know, in football, is George Best better than I don't know, Ronaldo or whatever? You know, it's just, you can't say it. You have to sort of, you know, the time I watched them, you know, they were brilliant. I mean, I used to go and watch Manchester United when Best and Charlton and Dennis Law were playing, and I didn't support Man U, but I used to think, oh my God, we'll lose today, because they were just phenomenal players, you know. But
with time, of course it does. And I think that's probably a great way to end. I mean, we're talking about different eras and different times. I mean, you've worked through different eras with different people in different areas of motorsport, and it's been fantastic hearing about all your tales and insights. I mean, we could have sat here for 7 hours, I'm pretty sure, but we've got work in the morning. But it's been absolutely fantastic, we got nice kind words from Kike Mancia. He said it was a great pre-dinner evening, guys. So that's obviously dinner time. So thank you for tuning in, Kike. Thank you everyone tuned in for all the nice comments and all the interactions. Very much appreciated. But of course, thanks mostly to you, Chris. It's been brilliant speaking with you. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. So thank you very much for coming on and having a chat. I've loved it.
All right. I'm really happy to have done it. And as you said earlier, we must get a group of us around a table or whatever, and get Ian Phillips involved, because he's got loads and loads of stories as well, and a few others, and we can have a really good one. Okay.
Yeah. And I'll sit in the middle of it wondering what I'm doing there. No, that'd be great. And we'll definitely get something sorted out. But thank you very much again to everyone.
All right, and you're going to put the link to my son's. It's not called the hard compound. It's actually called compound footwear. So there's a link.
There was like a collaboration coming up. We'll see. But no, fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. We're back next week. We'll be announcing something later on this week, and we're on 2 wheels next week. So interesting stuff.
Oh, okay. Right.
But thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate the support as always. And once again, Chris, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you indeed. Okay, bye. Good night, guys.
Night, guys.